Good afternoon or good evening. It's 6:11 and we're starting the Audit Subcommittee meeting for February 21st. And I'd like the clerk for ask for a roll call, please.
Committee Member Brock?
Yes.
Committee Member Davis is absent right now. Committee Member Para?
Here.
Vice Chair Verval?
Here.
And Chair Vandenberg.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is going to be to elect the chair and vice chair for the next year. And I open the floor for nominations.
I have questions, if I could, in relation to that. I have a question probably for the city attorney's office. I've heard we've received some comments from residents concerning moving the chair position around, not having the same person in chair. So that's the question, is that something that has to be done? Or can the current chair continue if we so wish? And the second question related to that would be, I think the chair's term ends June 30th. And so would it be, probably not something you can answer, but is it wise to select a chair for 6 months when we might have to select another chair at the end of June or early July? So those are my two questions.
I believe we changed the council rules to say the chair is elected annually at the first meeting. So the term would begin now. I don't believe there's a term limit, so somebody could be reelected as the chair.
If I may answer the second point, I did contact the city clerk today regarding my ability to serve. And with an application that will come at mid-year, I will be looking to have my second term approved by the city council, and that term would hopefully be approved and I would move through this fiscal annual year.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, so to tie it together, that if somebody were elected chair right now, but then not renewed on a term, then you would have to elect a new chair at the end of the term.
Right, and that was the question that I was getting from residents. Do you want to elect someone who might be leaving in halfway through their year term?
That's up to
so that's why I was asking, because we had received those letters, as I'm sure you guys did as well.
Okay, does that address your questions, Member Brock?
Yes, it did.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I asked for nominations for chair.
This is Mark Verville. I'll nominate Elizabeth for another term for chair.
Is there a second?
I don't know if anyone heard. I'll second that. This is Gleam. I apologize for being late.
Welcome, Mayor Davis. So there's a second, and for 1 year for the nomination for me, and I would ask for a vote on that.
Okay, Committee Member Brock?
Yes.
Committee Member Davis?
Yes.
Committee Member Para?
Yes.
Vice Chair Verval?
Yes.
And Chair Vandenberg?
Yes.
Okay, so motion
Is there
passes.
supposed to be public input before the election or post?
There should have been public comment before the vote.
My apologies. That is not what my agenda indicated. My agenda indicated public input afterwards.
So
Yeah,
how would you like to handle that, City Attorney?
I would take the public comment and then vote again.
Okay.
Sorry.
We are happy to take public comment on, I understand about the election of the chair and the vice chair to the audit subcommittee. please open it for public comment. Thank you.
Okay, so if you're on the phone, if you would like to comment on this item, please press *5. As of now, I see someone named Oz guest with their hand up. So I'm going to assume that they would like to speak on this item. So one moment.
Hello,
Yes, you have 2 minutes to speak.
this is Olga Zurawska. There is a difference between public comment and public input, Chair Vandenberg. Anyway, it's definitely time for a change in the leadership of this subcommittee. Hopefully the representatives of the change slate, I'm sorry, I can't help but laugh, and or their appointee to the subcommittee will be selected tonight to hold the leadership positions. Well, we know that didn't happen. If that is not possible, I support Mayor Davis for chair. She's a woman of action. I think she probably could bring a lot to this subcommittee because it's been very, very stale. It would be unacceptable for the current chair to be reselected as chair and thus remain in a leadership position for 4 years in a row. It would be against city policy, which encourages the rotation of leadership. If there is another member of the subcommittee ready to serve as chair, it is imperative that the subcommittee allows them to serve rather than reselect the current chair. This is especially important considering that the current chair's term ends in 4 months, and let's hope she doesn't get reappointed to the subcommittee. I'd like to put it on the record that I take serious issue with the current chair's lack of diligence in getting to the bottom of the shortcomings of the Moss Adams report of November 2022. Such lack of diligence prevented the subcommittee from being able to discuss and offer sound recommendations for corrective action in order to ensure the city's effective and fiscally responsible responses to homelessness. Receive and file is the mantra of paper pushers, not leaders. Such failure at leadership on the most crippling social problem the city has been struggling with, and failure to fulfill the duties and responsibilities of the audit subcommittee should not be rewarded with another year in the position of chair. That's basically all I have to say, but all of you should be embarrassed of yourselves. Good night.
Thank you. Any other input from the public regarding the election of chair and vice chair?
I don't see any other raised hands.
All right, then on advice of the city attorney, we'll start again on the nomination and election of the chair and then the vice chair.
No, you just need to vote again. You don't need to re-nominate.
So we're just revoting on my nomination as chair?
Yes.
Thank you. If we can have a revote on the nomination.
There is someone else evidently who's on the phone. Is what I'm hearing.
What was the question?
There is someone else supposedly is on the phone waiting to speak.
Well, there's one caller, and if they would like to speak, if they can press 5-9 to indicate that they'd like to speak, that would help us identify them. I'm not seeing a raised hand, but committee member Brock, are you able to confirm if the caller on the list is the person
I've
that?
got someone named AN who says they're on the phone. Maybe it's Ann. I don't know. I've got AN is on the phone, asking you to unmute them.
Well, they're not raising their hand, but I can do that if this is okay with the
I have
committee.
no idea.
Let's see. Yeah, so I'm allowing their mic. But I'm not seeing that they can unmute themselves and speak.
Okay, then maybe I was wrong. We've already spent a lot of time.
Appreciate that. If we can have a vote again on the chair.
Okay. Committee Member Brock,
So let's just start over and open up nominations. I'm not sure if we need to, but since the one speaker asked if the mayor wanted to do it as well, we should probably just open it up. It'll only take a second.
City attorney said that we were through with nominations. I thought we'd go back and vote.
Legally, you can go either way. You can take the vote, see what the result is, and move on from there, or you can inquire whether anybody else is interested in serving.
Yeah, I suspect there won't be any other nominations, but it'd probably be good to ask since one more committee member entered the room late.
Yeah, and if you're asking me, my plate is pretty full being mayor right now. So I'm not sure I could devote the time to also being chair of the audit subcommittee. So I'm going to decline if someone were thinking of that.
All right.
I'm in
I
the
think for
same
the
boat.
5th time, I'll ask for a vote for the chair.
okay. Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verville,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. Thank you for that. I'm honored to move ahead as chair for the year and will look forward to serving this committee as best as I can. Second, we have nominations open for vice chair and would be looking for a nomination for that position.
I'll nominate Mark Burville.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Let's move ahead with a vote on the vice chair position of Mark Verville,
Do we need a
please.
call? Is there anybody that wants to call in on that point?
Public comment?
If there are any public speakers, please use the raise hand feature, or if you're on the phone, press *5.
I was informed the person, AN, who wanted to speak earlier left.
Okay.
And somebody had to leave.
Chair Vandenberg, there are no requests to speak.
Thank you. Let us move ahead on the vote for the vice chair position.
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verville,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Congratulations to Mark. And we move ahead as a working team for the new year, and we welcome all input from subcommittee members and the public and appreciate all that information we've received. My second item, City Attorney, was public input. Public input on anything from public speakers. Do we still ask for that at this point?
This is your general public comment. Yes.
Okay, so on general public comment, Maria, is there any speakers for us on public speakers?
So if anyone would like to speak on general public input, please press the raise hand button or *5 on your phones. And it doesn't look like we have any public speakers on general public input.
Great. Appreciate that feedback. Let's move forward to approval of the minutes, May 17th, 2022, regular meeting minutes. Do we have any speakers?
Again, please raise your hand or *5 if you have any comments on the minutes. Item 3. No raised hands. There are no speakers on this item.
Is there any discussion or feedback from subcommittee members? Seeing none, I ask for a motion to and a second to approve the minutes.
I'll move.
Thank you.
I'll
I'll
second.
second.
Thank you. And I think we need a roll call vote.
And to confirm, I think I heard Vice Chair Verval, who seconded the motion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verval,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. Next is item number 4, which is the Human Resources Progress Report. We have a presentation by Lori Gentles, the Chief People's Officer. Welcome,
Thank
Laura.
you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura. Thank you so much for advancing the slides. So good evening, Audit Subcommittee members. I'm Lori Gentles, the HR Director, Chief People Officer. And I do have members of my team that's joining me tonight in delivering this presentation. And I will introduce them now, but during their portion of the presentation, they will come on the screen. I have Mark Brower with me, who is the Deputy Director of Special Projects, who oversees HR administration, workforce analytics, budget, information systems. I have Michael Arnoldis, who is the HR Manager Division Head, who oversees benefits, classification, compensation, recruitment, talent acquisition, retirement. And the newest member of our team is Robert Scalise, who is the division head HR manager that oversees labor and employee relations and organizational development. So thank you for inviting us to provide a status update of the HR organizational assessment that was completed in the summer of 2020, actually around August or September, and our 5-year work plan that was developed as a result of the assessment. Last time we presented to you on the work plan was about 2 years ago. And so this presentation is going to be high level and focus on the most important work that we've been doing that align with our mission. So we're going to touch on organizational, structural, and cultural challenges and opportunities that we navigate, as well as review highlights of the strategic work plan and the progress and adjustments we've had to make since the last 2 years we were before you. You can go on to the next slide. As a reminder, I always like to start off any presentation we do with framing it around our mission statement, our people-driven mission statement, which we call the ARC. This is key to our success and key to helping us stay focused on the most critical core functions of HR. HR is oftentimes a catch-all for various pet projects that sometimes derail us from our core mission, but this mission really serves as our guardrail. So three-pronged mission statement is to attract and retain the next generation of leaders, to reinforce a civil and equitable workplace, and to cultivate a culture of accountability, empowerment, and leadership. You can go on to the next slide. So prior to the Moss-Adams assessment, and for those of you who were here 2 years ago, you may recall this, there are many new members since 2 years ago. But prior to the Moss-Adams assessment, HR did our own informal data gathering and assessment of HR services. And what we learned was that there are many of organizational, structural, and cultural challenges and obstacles that we have to overcome, and that there's plenty of room for enhancement. So that's what we've been doing. And we've been on our journey of moving toward those opportunities to enhance our level of services. The Moss-Adams report basically validated the things that we had found ourselves, and they produced 30 recommendations that can be distilled down into 3 key themes. So here are the themes: to provide clear direction and change management for HR staff, and to create efficiencies through redesigned processes and systems. And I want to pause on this one just a minute, because this one is near and dear to our heart. This is really the core and crux of what we think needs to occur in HR. And I just want to report that in 2020, we were successful in moving toward addressing this issue. We were successful in placing a measure on the general election ballot that would repeal certain sections of the city charter pertaining to civil service rules. This was a big deal because the team was successful in building a solid and coherent business case to council, and council endorsed that change, and so did the voters of the city of Santa Monica. And this change was significant because it really opened the door for my team to start the meet and confer process with our labor unions regarding changes to modernize the civil service rules, which we feel are a big impediment to one of our mission statements, and that is recruiting and retaining the next generation of leaders. The civil service rules are 50 years old or more, some of them, and they do present significant barriers to efficient operations, delays to recruiting. They're overly restrictive and just not appropriate for a modern day labor market. However, due to lots of organizational leadership changes, the commencement of negotiations with 10 bargaining groups, we were asked to put that project on hold. But I am happy to report, and you'll find later in the presentation, that we are picking that up again and are moving full steam ahead. So the third theme was to modernize and stabilize HR service delivery to ensure that HR is a reliable partner. And later in the presentation, we'll go through more detail on some of these things. Next slide. So, we always have, best laid plans. Best laid plans were embargoed by numerous issues that we had no control over. And I want to just contextualize some of the things that we were dealing with. Organizations are living, breathing organisms, and we have to continue to shift and reshuffle to and respond accordingly. So although we continue to work on our 5-year work plan, there were other things that came upon us as well that we had to deal with. We dealt with layoffs of the first kind of its magnitude in the city of Santa Monica. We had massive leadership change, not only in our executive leadership, but we had council, very top leadership changes to the tune of about 50% in both. We had a lot of employees that were dealing with psychological and emotional issues due to facing their own mortality with the onset of COVID, the social and racial tension and social unrest that was occurring at the time, and bargaining unit, and all of the other things that were going on at that time. So these were things that we had to deal with. HR took our employees' health and wellness very seriously, and we started to dedicate a lot of our time and energy to supporting our employees in that way. You can go to the next slide. In addition to that, there were compounding micro and macro variables that we needed to deal with that all impinge upon our ability to continue to work our plan and to meet customer demands. The unemployment rate is extremely low, which impacts our ability to recruit and attract people to our organization. The national birth rate and labor shortage is very, very real. There's a 50% reduction in national birth rate since 2 decades ago. And so the supply of people is actually lower. The emotional and psychological shifts that I talked about is very real and impacts our employees and the work that they do and the work that we have to do in support of them. We are in a different labor market, HR market overall. Competition is very, very stiff. Supply is low, as I just mentioned, but competition is high. And it's not just competition with our labor market, our surrounding city government. We are now in competition, direct competition with private sector agencies. We are also in competition with other types of streams of income, such as the gig economy, people, finding other jobs that are more flexible or meets their lifestyle a little bit better. and normal attrition and turnover and all of the other things that are happening right now on a local, national, and global landscape. So, next slide. So I do want to just pause a little bit and take just a snapshot of where we've been and where we are. And I promise I'll get to what we're doing today. But again, setting the stage for all of you. Pre-COVID, we were at 30.2 FTE. And that was, I would say, a maintenance mode staffing level for the complexity, the volume of this organization that is probably not even adequately staffed at that point. But then COVID hit, and you can go to the next slide. And this is what HR looked like a few short months after that. It was before the Moss Adams study commenced, but before it was concluded. 6 positions were eliminated, and an additional 20% of one full-time position was also eliminated. Additionally, 3 of our people were demoted to lower level positions, which meant that the capacity and the types of work that they could do, we lost that as well. And these positions, unfortunately, were right smack dab in recruiting and benefits operations. If you could go to the next slide. This is what we look like today. So we went from 30 to whatever it was. Now we're at 24. It's still a 14% reduction, but we're doing increased workload as well as strategic initiatives, as well as dealing with emotional turmoil and issues with employees. So with that, you can go on to the next slide. Here we are. Yep. So we're staying the course. So we're pleased to report that even with all of that, the HR team has been successful in pushing forward our initiatives of the 30 recommendations. So what you see here is that 40% of those 30 recommendations have been fully implemented. That number actually should be about 53%, because there are several items that are documented as in progress, but they have actually been implemented and they are ongoing. So some of the things are just a one and done. You do it and then it's ongoing. It's an ongoing thing. So slightly higher numbers there. Next slide. So again, in staying the course, here's just some high level things that we've achieved, and the team will go into a little bit more detail on some other things. So one of the big things were policies and procedures to create some consistency and reproducible decision making and transparency. So we've done that for our internal staff, as well as revised and cleaned up policies for the external department community. We've improved internal and external communication by various periodic, regularly standing meetings and messages that go out to share information, to problem solve, do all sorts of things. We completed a process inventory and related software systems to identify other areas to modernize operations and to increase efficiencies and improve customer service. And we have created solutions for learning opportunities, including things that I have listed there. Better Up, which is it's been highly popular within our organization, highly utilized by many employees. And basically, we're the only city that I am aware of in California or elsewhere that provides access to one-on-one coaching and development to every single one of its employees, including elected officials if they chose to use it. Next slide. So some things that are in progress and ongoing. we will continue and are continuing to work on compensation decisions, make sure that people understand them, what we're doing, are they clear, understandable, defensible, employee investigations. There are lots of concerns that came out in the recommendations around that, around timeliness, clarity of process, etc. Realignment and outsourcing. This was particularly pertains to benefits. And so we have an update on that. A technology roadmap, again, constantly looking for efficiencies. And then communication, there can never be enough communication. So we can always continue to improve on that. We've made some great strides, but we're continuing to work on that as well. Next slide. So these are our top priorities for 2023, 2024. Again, barring any unforeseen things that just come out of the sky that we don't have any control over, this is our plan for this year. We're going to continue to work on the civil service rules, the documentation of policies, the modernization of technology, self-service options, and again, communication. And now we're going to go into a little more detail in each of these. So I gave you a little bit of a snapshot of what happened back in 2020 as we were full force with the civil service rule modernization project that got put on hold. We are now picking that back up and revising our approach and strategy. And we've looked through the entire civil service rules and identified them by priority. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. This is a long-term project. Will require meeting and conferring with our labor partners and then coming back to council for adoption. But classification and personnel provisions is our #1 priority, given the labor market that we're in right now. Phase 2 would be the Rule 3, which is a process that is somewhat exclusionary in its outcomes, if you will. And then phase 3, reduction in force provisions. Not that we're anywhere close to that, but during the 2020 situation, for the first time ever, the provision in the civil service rules was actually tested, and there's room for improvement and clarity around that. Again, the whole purpose is to provide flexibility and to ensure equity. Next slide.
Good evening, Mike Arnaldo's Human Resources Manager, and I have the next 2 slides. As Lori previously mentioned, we've been working on improving documentation of our policies and procedures. Some examples of policies and procedures that have been revised or developed recently include the temporary staffing guide, which illustrates the various options for hiring employees in a temporary status, the municipal code requirements associated with each assignment type, internal requirements regarding permissible extensions and associated procedures. We also developed a transfer policy that defines eligibility requirements and the process for requesting transfer, as well as the process for the certification of eligible candidates. We are currently working on the development of an advanced step placement policy that provides for reproducible outcomes with regard to advanced step placement, while also ensuring that we are meeting the needs of the organization in this challenging labor market. We have developed a manual of standard operating procedures with regard to new employee onboarding that provides for a step-by-step instructions for onboarding new employees, so that if we brought on a new technician and assigned them that function, they would be able to take that manual and with minimal training be able to assume the responsibility of new employee onboarding. And finally, we've developed a personnel investigation policy and procedure that provides guidance for conducting administrative investigations of allegations of misconduct, substandard performance, and policy violations, with the goal of ensuring clarity and transparency around the investigation process. Next slide. We've also been working on implementing or modernizing technology across human resources. Some examples, recent examples or current examples is the implementation of a new benefits administration system. Our current platform is PlanSource, and we are in progress to switch to a new system April 1st of this year called Audit, which will provide for a better user interface for our employees in managing their benefits and electing the benefits that are provided to them, as well as just providing for a more efficient platform and efficient use of resources from the human resources side. Oh, no, next, go back, please. Thank you. We also conducted a review of our applicant tracking system, which is referred to or known as NeoGov. We partnered with NeoGov and went through an extensive needs assessment so they could understand how the system is being utilized and identify areas for improvement, after which NeoGov provided 6 hours of training for our staff. And finally, with the pandemic and changing the nature in which we evaluate applicants for employment with the city, we have employed additional cloud-based testing technologies with regard to multiple choice testing and skill-based testing. Next slide. Thank you.
Good evening, Mark Brower, Deputy Director of Special Projects. Just to build upon what Michael was discussing regarding modernizing technology, it's one thing to have the technology, it's another thing to leverage it. The city had implemented a new ERP, which is the underlying HR software system, in 2020. We've since been able to utilize various capabilities of that new system. One way in which we're doing that is by providing self-service options. Two are highlighted here. One is utilizing the tool to allow employees to request address changes and as well as update emergency contact information. These may not seem like very major items, but with 2,100 employees moving and updating emergency contact information, this is the type of work that adds up and prevents us from doing value-added work. It also has a lot of benefits for our employees. They're no longer required to come to us to be able to request these changes. So these services are available 24/7. It also enhances the accuracy because we're no longer post-processing these requests. But it's not always possible to be able to utilize new technology. So where we still have to use the old forms, those old forms are new. They're digital and they're fillable. So folks have access to those forms 24/7. They could submit them to us. They're in the format we need to be able to upload into their systems or distribute to our various vendors. So these are things that allow us to be more efficient and provide a higher level of service to our customers, something we're pretty proud of. Folks also rely on HR for information. I'm partially responsible for data and data analytics, and we don't want to be the bottleneck. So what we've done is identified opportunities where HR historically has been that bottleneck for information. And we've made and created reports that are available to members of the city team in a real-time way digitally. So they've got that information at their fingertips. We're also looking for ways to continually improve. One area is looking at our new hire process, all aspects of the new hire process, and finding opportunities where we're not necessarily adding value. In the new hire process, all employees have to be fingerprinted, very important. And historically, there's one day where employees had to come to the city where HR was coordinating that date and time to get somebody through the background check. You can imagine in this competitive recruiting environment, we want to remove those obstacles. And so we have a new process that allows employees to go through the FBI and DOJ background check at a location that's convenient to them at a time that's convenient to them. There's thousands of these locations all over the state. And so when we hire someone, as soon as they have the new hire paperwork, they can go to one of the approved locations, get fingerprinted, and that fingerprint results will get securely transmitted back to the city. From a practical standpoint, what does that mean? So not only does it benefit the employee because it allows them to not have to take time off work to come arrange a time for the city to be fingerprinted, but it also allows the time to hire process to be compressed to anywhere between 1 and 7 days. So it's something that seems like a simple solution, but has had really tangible positive impacts, not only for our department, but also for our customers. Next slide, please.
And as I mentioned, we cannot over communicate. And so we're trying to communicate from all different angles and all different venues. Last year we implemented monthly HR messages that went out around employee emotional, physical, financial health and well-being, as well as other important HR topics and information that we wanted to share. We are continuing to hold our monthly meetings with department heads and their teams. This is a great opportunity for us to problem solve, shop ideas, remind people of processes, etc. We have standing items on these meetings where we're constantly talking about employee development, and engagement through performance evaluations and other tools. We also implemented for the first time in the city of Santa Monica's history, at least I'm being told that, an engagement and fulfillment survey where we asked employees and got information and data from them about what's important to them. And we also implemented a digital exit interview survey. And we're looking at both of those pieces of data mining those two data sources and identifying things that we can do as an organization to make sure people feel good about the place that they work. And that ties into our attracting and retaining the next generation of leaders. We want to keep our employees. And then we are often reminded of the communication layers to make sure that when we communicate outwardly to our customer departments, that we're reminded to communicate internally with our own employees, because they will often get asked, what is this or that? And there was a vacuum at one point. And so we're making sure that we're doing all of the layers, department head layer, leadership layer, entire city layer, HR layer. So I'm very proud of the things that we've been able to accomplish despite the things that came upon us that we had no control over and that we had to pivot and respond accordingly. On behalf of my whole team, I just want to thank them publicly, because I think that they're doing an exceptionally good job given the environment that we're in and the things that we've had to face. We, along with other departments, are not adequately staffed. You hear that all the time. We're unable to fully leverage technology, but we're working on it, and our structures need some improvement. We have global, national, and local issues that impact our work and our employees that we continue to contend with. And so as we work through this plan, we will continue to have to shift and reshuffle and respond accordingly to the environment. But we are making progress, and we'd love to get any questions that you have for us about anything that we did not cover or anything that we covered. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Laura. I really appreciate you bringing your team. We are going to move first to if there's any speakers who would like to speak to this topic about Human Resources Progress Report from the work they've done, work that Moss Adams did in 2019 and 2020. We welcome those comments.
So please raise your hand or press *5 if you'd like to speak. Okay, I do not see any public speakers.
All right. Thank you for looking. And next we come about discussion and questions of staff. Who would like to, does anybody on the audit subcommittee have any questions or discussion points they'd like to talk to Lori or somebody on her staff about? Well, I do. So the work that you're doing on the top 5, Lori, when do you think that's going to be complete? I mean, do you have a plan for when your most important items are actually going to be completed? I know you've had staffing problems, and I know that, you know, it's been slow going for many reasons, but many big projects have to, you know, replan at some point. So I think we might be interested in understanding when these important items would come to completion, especially the top 5 that you identified.
So when we started out 2 years ago, we talked about a 5-year plan because we knew that all of these projects, especially again, given the environment, do not happen overnight. It's slow, slow, slow. And it requires a lot of navigating through various things, such as labor relations. We have to always partner and be in collaboration with our labor partners. So we take that seriously. It's an obligation that we have to do. So when we're talking about the civil service rules, I would expect that, as I showed on the slide, that we had phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I would expect that phase 1 would take more than a year to complete. This is a long, we are unwinding 50 years of policy. And there's a lot to it. So that's what we do. And so we try to parcel it down into bite-sized chunks that we think are less controversial so that we can get through that faster. And so the piece that I identified as phase 1, we believe is the right thing to prioritize first.
So I don't think I heard an answer though. You said it's a 5-year plan and you're 2 years into it. Is it going to be finished then in 2026 for the top 5?
I can't answer that. That's our
Ooh,
goal.
really?
I cannot answer that given what I shared with you with the external factors that come into play. I mean, this is the reality. I am being 100% candid and honest that we are making progress. We're at 53% progress of a 5-year plan in 2 years or less than 2 years, and 2 lost years, basically. So that's the best response that I could give you, is blatant candor about that.
Well, I think the comment is we've all been on big projects that had to replan. So I think we'd be looking for, given the status of where we are with our staffing and understanding where the environment's going, that a replan would be appropriate. So we'll need to talk about that in the future. I think Vice Chair Verville has a question.
I do, thank you. First of all, thank you for a very good presentation, much appreciated. When you're looking at, you know, I've heard several times now that, you know, the civil service rules are 50 years old. Age is not necessarily, you know, a criteria that automatically, I think, determines whether or not a policy or procedure is right for removal. So as you go through all that stuff, how do you triage it, and how do you determine, you know, I'm assuming it's not age, but what criteria are you using to triage what you look at and what you don't?
So Michael may have a response to that as well. But for example, today alone, 2 different occasions, 2 different departments are asking for an exception to one of the provisions that's in the civil service rules. And it has to do with acting assignments. So in our civil service rules, we have very restrictive, no flexibility whatsoever. You are put into a corner and that is it. And so it's a provision that says that people can only work in an acting assignment for 180 days. Well, with the information that I provided about the unemployment rate being 3.4%, with there being a shortage of talent, with the competition being high, all of those things, it's pure economics. We may not be able to recruit and find somebody in 6 months. And so what do? You leave the person in there, and that's a violation of the rule, which I, as the HR director, can't violate? Or do we say, hey, that rule might have been great when unemployment rate is high and you have, all of the other factors that lead to ability to recruit. We are just in a different market today. And so flexibility really is the key. It's not that you throw the baby out with the bathwater, but how do you tweak it to fit modern day so that you can do your business?
No, I appreciate all that. And, people, those community members that have worked in large organizations, we have all basically, I think, encountered situations like that. But I guess my question is more of, you just gave us a specific example where, because of the situation, you've identified that as something that needs to be addressed, right? But that's kind of a bumper car approach to identifying rules that need to be addressed. You hit one, you go, oh, shoot, that needs to be addressed. You hit another one, oh, that needs to be addressed. Is there a more systematic way of looking at all these things and basically identifying throughout the code what it is that you're going to focus on and what it is okay as it is?
Sure.
Or is it a bumper car approach where, as you hit these things, they get on the list?
Well, no, we went through every single provision. We did a comprehensive review of every single provision in the civil service rules. A methodical, tedious process, what works, what's not working, what's an HR best practice, where does this policy where we know didn't contemplate or anticipate all of the unknowns that, we face, and how do we create some elasticity and flexibility so that when the unknown does happen, we can maneuver. Right now, we can't maneuver, and that is a huge, huge problem.
Okay, one last follow-up, and then I'll be quiet. So does that imply that you have a list of civil service policies that are going to remain as is, and you have a definitive list of those that are on the hit list to be modified or adjusted?
Yeah, so we went through, carry this thing around with me everywhere because it is a problem. We went through every single one of these, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. In phase 1, we identified, I don't know, I can't remember, maybe 20, 30 provisions that would fall in phase 1. Some of them we don't need to touch, but the ones that we do, they fell into that bucket.
So you have separate lists.
Yes.
The keep
yes,
list
we do.
and the modify list.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Well, the keep is just not included.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any other discussion or questions for Lori or her staff regarding their presentation?
I think committee member Brock has his hand.
Oh, thank you. Please.
Quick question, Lori. This is boilerplate. This doesn't really concern your whole report, but you triggered something. You talked about the civil service provisions and how we're having so many difficulties hiring great staff members. I know we just declared a homeless emergency, and we're relaxing some civil service rules in order to create hires in the departments that deal with homelessness in the city. Will that help, at least on a temporary basis?
That will help in that very narrow realm, but that emergency provision is not applicable across other positions.
But it will help in some areas, either extending length of employment past the civil service rules or allowing us to make quicker hires, right?
Yes.
Bypass some of the impediments to hiring.
Yes. No, it's yes.
Okay,
yes.
so that's good. That's what I want to know. I want to know that we did something that will help. Thank you. Oh, and I will add one more thing. I really liked hearing this report from your office. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
All right, anybody else? Okay, well, I think everybody wants to extend, if we were in person, Lori, which we would be next meeting if you came to that, in person, our thanks for bringing your staff online to present, as well as you spending the time. I think we do want to keep hearing about this. It's very important as to the essence of the labor and who we are as a city. So we appreciate all your work on this and hope you good speed in the future, and we'll look forward to hearing from you again. With that, I'm looking for a motion to receive and file
I'll
and
move.
provide comments. Thank you, Member Brock. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Verville. I ask for a roll call vote, please.
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
I'm sorry, did
Committee
we have
member
comment
Davis?
on this?
Yeah.
Yes.
You're talking about speakers?
Yes.
Yes, we did
Okay.
ask. Thank you.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verville,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. And again, our many thanks to staff and Lori for joining us for the evening. It's a great way
Thank
to
you.
spend your Tuesday night, right? All right, guys.
It's
Thank
all
you.
good.
And
Thank you very
Godspeed
much.
on all your recommendations. Thank you again.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Next we have the Moss Adams report. Do we have Colleen up?
Hello, this is Haley Garcia. I'm here in place of Colleen tonight.
Hey Lee, nice to see you. Elizabeth
Nice to see
Vandenberg,
you.
good to see you.
Long time no see.
We're on item number 5, Human Services Grants Program report. And I believe, Haley, you will be our staff presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm actually going to pass it over to Ariel Weibarger, a manager on our team, which led this project.
All right, welcome Ariel and Haley.
Hello, I'm just getting the presentation up really quick. Give me just a moment. Okay. Okay, please let me know if you can see my screen. Great. Okay. As Haley mentioned, my name is Ariel Leibarger. I'm a manager with Moss Adams, and I worked really closely with the HSGP team on this monitoring project. And we've got some good updates since the last time we presented a small brief update last fall. So where is my, there it is. Okay. So tonight we're going to go through the project overview just to reorient you on all the things that we did and the purpose of the project, as well as the project phases and the outcomes of the project, both in grantee monitoring, so the actual monitoring that we executed on behalf of the city, as well as our review of the current monitoring process and our recommendations associated. So again, just to reorient you on the project, we were brought in to take a look at the monitoring processes, as well as help get the city caught up on monitoring that had kind of gone dormant during COVID, as things did all over the nation. The city contributes approximately $8 million annually through the Human Services Grant Program as part of FY 2020 to 2021, which is the period which we reviewed. We looked at 19 funded agencies and 35 distinct programs within those agencies. And like I said, we executed the desk reviews, site visits, and we did a review of the current monitoring processes. However, we did not include any recommendations, any review of the funding that is being looked at and going to be going out right now. So quickly, I will just show you guys as a reminder, the agencies and the programs that are a part of this, just so you have an idea of the breadth and depth that the city supports across a multitude of programs. And
Can
then
you go back to that slide for 1 second?
yes,
Thank you.
there you go. Let me know when you're ready for me to change.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, just to remind you of what our project phases are, that includes project kickoff, our fact finding, which is our initiation phase where we meet with the stakeholders of every project, find out more about the organization, what they do, how they do it, and kind of what the intent and purpose and really the distinct needs are of our project. Then we go into the analysis phase, which is where we spent the most of our time, where we were working with grantees, which are those agencies and programs, to execute the desk audit, site reviews, and evaluate that monitoring process. And now we're here at the end, where we're talking about reporting and everything we found. The bulk of the rest of the presentation is going to spend time talking to you about the outcomes of this analysis phase, and then leading into the recommendations at the end. So the grantee monitoring analysis, again, was over those 19 agencies and 35 distinct programs where we did a risk-based approach desk review. Basically, that just means that we said, can you provide us all of your financial information during the period of review? So again, FY 2020 through 21, and asked for the detailed underlying support. That means receipts, POs, receiving documentations, timesheets, things of that nature. And then we also executed the site visits. Again, using a risk-based approach, we selected a population of these agencies and organizations to review participant active and inactive files. So are they retaining the minimum information that should be on file for these particular programs? So the first outcome I want to talk to you about is that the bulk of your agencies are what we would consider low risk. So there were no findings. If there was something there, it was really small and could easily be cleared with follow-up by the city. Very few medium and high risk. But I think the moral of the story here is that your agencies are doing great things with the funds. We didn't find anything that would make us concerned that there might be fraud or misuse of funds. In every instance, it seemed like the agencies were out there doing great things and wanted to do more and do better with the funds that they do have, which was a great thing. So in all, not all cases, but in most cases, agencies were able to provide the support that we requested, although we did have to give them additional time. Again, there was just that lapse in period where this kind of review hadn't been done, and there was a lot of employee turnover at those organizations, which we're seeing across our clients. So there was a lot of technical assistance, support, kind of training that needed to be done there to help get them to a good place, but everything looked great. Next, on the site visits, we did see some missing or incomplete documentation, but again, it was minimal. We had 3 instances where documentation to support participant eligibility wasn't on file or couldn't be located. And then 1 instance where a participant file closure documentation was just incomplete. So it was there, but it just was missing a few things. Finally, we also identified 1 instance where a program was unable to provide any participant file documentation, but that was 1 instance out of many. So again, something that we would consider on the lower risk side. So the overall monitoring summary, in most instances, agencies appeared to properly account for, track, and monitor city funds. They were collecting and retaining the appropriate and required information for those participant files that we looked at. And with follow-up provided by the city and the HSGP program personnel, a lot of these things could be cleared up pretty easily. Again, we did provide a lot of additional technical assistance just because this particular kind of in-depth review had not been done in a couple of years and due to high turnover. nothing that we wouldn't expect in situations like this. And the agencies did seem very appreciative, very open to learning, wanting to do better. They all had great praise for the city staff that help support them in these programs and want more support. The second, I guess, third portion of our analysis is review of city monitoring processes. So through the process of figuring out what all HSGP does, how do they monitor, how do they follow up and keep track of the funds, the programs, everything associated with putting funds into your community. We also were able to look at the processes currently in place. And we did touch on this during our last update, so I'm not going to dive super far into these things. There's a lot on this slide and the next, but I want to highlight that the city's current process goes deeper, broader, and is more in depth than what we typically see of a monitoring process of subrecipients with the clients that we work with. So there's a lot around the status reporting, which is great. They do that twice a year, both financial and programmatic. You can see all of the things that are included with this monitoring process, which is great. And then on the next slide, we're going to talk through site visits, which are also conducted during 2 set periods during the year on separate groupings of agencies. They kind of rotate in and out as the years go. The processes currently take a deeper look at programs in those site visits than what we would typically see. Stuff like staffing and job descriptions for an organization as a whole. If they have how many people are on their boards, if they have grievance forms, which aren't always necessarily an up-to-date requirement, things like that. Lots of time spent there on site to make sure that documents are filed and retained, that there's signage in the building, things like that. And then finally, the important part, or at least to me, the important part is the recommendations. Oops, sorry, Siri decided to talk. The recommendations that came out of this, I grouped these into 3 spaces around monitoring and process updates, technical assistance, and then the potential for outsourced support through these processes. So focusing in on monitoring process updates, really streamlining the monitoring process to ensure that the information collected pertains and pertinent to the program execution. Considering developing some tools and updating the processes to increase that efficiency. So are there places where the city could pull back but still get the information that's needed and dive in deeper where maybe it should be done a little bit more as a best practice? Providing that technical assistance, I want to make sure it's very clear that HSGP personnel provide tons of technical assistance from everything we heard, not only from staff, but also from these agencies. It's one-on-one, it's on demand, it's as needed. It's just that it hasn't recently included that technical assistance around desk reviews and that detailed expenditure kind of deep dive that we did, which hadn't been done in a while. So just really looking to improve the quality of reporting that you guys are getting from agencies through providing program or citywide trainings on a more regular basis to help support your agencies, but also make the processes easier for your personnel because they won't have to do so many questions or such deep dives if you provide that technical assistance on an ongoing basis. And then the last one is around outsourced support. The city pre-pandemic, had an outsourced consultant who came in and would conduct and execute the site visits and desk reviews. That has since, because of budget cuts and other things that happened during COVID with the world, that has since been taken away, but is something that we would highly recommend the city look into and consider, as it does provide that third-party objective review of things, higher level of transparency, and it offloads some of the burden from your personnel. so that HSGP and city staff can really focus in on the day-to-day monitoring of programs, making sure that operations continue, that agencies are getting the support that they need on the ongoing daily basis. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And we will be moving to ask if there's any speakers on this item, Human Services Grants Program report by Moss Adams.
Okay, we have one raised hand, so if there are any other speakers, press the raise hand button or press *5 if you're on the phone. We have one caller, the last four numbers of their phone number is 6687. And are you allowed to, so caller, are you able to unmute yourself so that you can speak?
No, I'm unmuted. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, great. So you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. Please allow me to begin by saying how disappointed I am with the City Council and City staff's management for human services grants, especially for homeless services. To everyone in attendance, how does it make you feel that the city is spending your tax dollars with no accountability for where the money is going or results for the money spent? I'm also very concerned about the recommendation to further reduce reporting standards to make staff's job easier. I say, if staff is not competent to do their jobs as they should be done, then maybe they shouldn't be in those positions. And I'm further horrified that it would even be suggested to increase the cost to the taxpayers to make the staff's jobs easier. Because if the city is not hiring people competent for their positions at the high rate of pay they receive, why should the taxpayers have to pay for more of that kind of service? So for the reporting standards, I do not think they should be decreased in any way. If anything, I think they should be increased so that they are following the rules and laws in place now for grant reporting. Because by this audit, the city and city staff are severely lacking in accountability. For example, for state and federal grant recipients, if you cannot account for the funding or misappropriate it to another purpose other than the specified grant purpose, then the recipient of the grant funding has to pay it back. I vaguely remember Barbara Collins from the Housing Authority having to return grant funding to the state. I mention this because the city is seeking more county, state, and federal grant funding for the homeless emergency the City Council declared on February 14, 2023. The city and its staff really need to start being accountable for funding, given the results of the funding.
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other callers? Please raise your hand or press *5. I think that was our last speaker.
Thank you very much. I see all 4 other subcommittee members with their hands up. I'm going to start with Christine Para. I'm sorry, I didn't see who put their hand up first. So Member Para, you are up with your question.
I actually was the last one, but.
Oh, well, sorry. You haven't spoken. We haven't heard from you.
Okay, well, thank you. And you have to forgive me because I'm relatively new to auditing and I don't have a financial background, so forgive my questions. So when a program is audited for a specific year, is it typical to not include a cursory review of previous data or audits in your reporting?
So by cursory review, are you saying something like, anyone else getting feedback?
Oh, sorry.
No problem. By cursory review, I assume you're talking about some kind of like pre-award during the application phase review. That would be done like kind of where you're at now, and that would ask questions in general about, have you received funding like this before? Have you had any concerns or anything come out of that that would cause a red flag? Do you have an accounting system that would allow you to track the funds coming in and the expenses going out? Do you have personnel who can help properly manage and oversee the program and the funds associated? As part of this particular project, we weren't looking at the pre-award work that was done. We were really focused in on FY 2020 and 2021 to get the financial and site visit reviews up to date and completed. So that was really focused in on ongoing projects which had been operating for some time during the last couple of years. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, and I'm sorry if there's an echo. Just because, I know that these grantees have had these grants or have been receiving grants from the city now for 8 years. And so I know that you were hired to review or to monitor or audit the grant for specific year, for FY 2021. And so I was curious if during that review or during that monitoring, if it also included a review of any paperwork on behalf of the city of the previous year's grants, to see if there was any deficiencies or findings at all, or because we've got 8 years of grants here with the same grantees, and so I was just curious if there was any other additional findings or information that you may have had a cursory review of at all. And I know that you were only hired to review or monitor FY 2021, but I was just curious if there was any review at all. That was one of my questions.
And do you mind muting? Thank you. Before I pass it off to Haley, who could probably help me answer this one, I do want to say that we did take what we typically execute as a pre-award risk assessment when you're looking at federal pass-through funds, and we did request the agencies or the grantees to complete that asked those questions around, have you had grants like this in the past? The answer was yes. Could you provide, some information around the monitoring that was conducted? Have you had an external audit? Were there findings with that? Things of that nature, to gather kind of a broader background about these agencies and a better understanding of where they're at and where they're coming from, so that when we looked at the reporting and we worked with them in technical assistance, we were able to come kind of more prepared with, what do they have in place? What do they not have in place? Things like that. And then Haley, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, that was exactly what I was going to say, is assessing on the pre-awards or on the pre-audit side what their current state was, and then utilizing that to inform the level of monitoring that we were doing and the level of technical assistance that we were going to provide them. But again, our main focus was on evaluating the funding for the periods under review, because HSGP was responsible for conducting monitoring prior to when it was put on hold in 2020.
Sorry for the feedback. And then also, and I understand that prior to COVID, there was a CPA firm that was assisting with the monitoring. Were they handling all monitoring or just a very specific portion of it? And are you able to explain to us what they were handling of the monitoring and what city staff was handling?
Yeah. So city staff, or at least my understanding, the city staff were handling the biannual or the 2 times a year financial and programmatic reporting that was a requirement of all your grantees. So that included the financial, the site visit, the participant file reviews, things like that. They were doing the day-to-day communication, the day-to-day technical assistance, meetings with agencies, helping keep them up and trained, things like that. And then the external consultant or the CPA firm that was supporting these processes came in to do those twice a year site visits and desk reviews. So I want to hone in that ongoing monitoring, it kind of falls into two categories. You have your ongoing monitoring that is associated with the day-to-day function of a program, both financially, programmatically, all of that, as well as the monitoring, the more in-depth monitoring that takes place at specific cadences during a program. That could be once at closeout, it could be once or twice a year, whatever makes sense for that program. And that's where my understanding is the external consultant came in, is they executed those site visits, those desk reviews at those indicated time periods. So city staff handled ongoing day-to-day support, day-to-day monitoring. External consultant did site reviews, desk reviews.
Thank you. I'll let somebody move forward. I'm going to have some more questions, but I'll let someone else go right now. Thanks.
That's fine. I think we'll move on to Member Davis. You have your hand up for questions.
I do. Thank you so much. So following up a little bit on Member Parra's question, we did previously have external folks doing the desk reviews and the site visits. Do we have any sense of what that was costing, or what that would cost if we went back to having a third party do those two portions of the evaluation?
I don't have that information on what it cost previously, and if you wanted to talk with a new consultant, the cost would have changed between then and now. I don't know if there's a better answer from anyone else.
I'm sure it's gotten more expensive, but I was just curious if we had some sense of what that cost, because I don't honestly remember. With regard to the evaluations we did of the various grantees in terms of technical assistance, am I correct? Your report suggests that, sort of, for lack of a better term, on-demand technical assistance wasn't really the issue. It was more sort of upfront or periodic technical assistance. So that, for example, when we brought a grantee on board, we would say, here's what's going to be expected, or here are the templates you should use, or whatever. But if somebody called and said, I don't know how to do this, we would respond. I'm trying to get a sense between sort of the on-demand technical support we were doing and the kind of technical support you seem to think we should do more of.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you have the distinction there very right, in that city staff were providing that on-demand, day-to-day support as questions came up or needs arised. The part that we're recommending gets expanded is that kind of city-wide programmatic updates that could happen, whether that's annually or quarterly, whatever makes sense or that looks like, to say, hey, just a reminder, you guys have city funds. Here's what that means. Here's what the basic requirements are. Here's who you contact when you have questions. Here's what templates we expect you to use, things like that. I do want to note that with the city having an 8-year funding period, which is much longer than anything I think I've ever seen, the max I've seen is like 2 to 3 years. Not just with COVID. I mean, COVID had huge staffing impacts across all organizations. But in general, in over 8 years, you're going to see high staffing turnover. So regardless of on-demand or predetermined broader groups of technical assistance, sessions, office hours, webinars, whatever you want to call it, you're going to have to do that, because staff is going to turn over, training is going to need to happen, templates change, the world changes, right? So you want to make sure you have those periodic, intentional moments with grantees outside of the one-on-one, so that you're communicating the same information holistically.
And
Okay,
real quick, to answer your question on the outsourcing, we've seen many other cities or counties outsource the ongoing desk review and site visit process. It can be very cost efficient. As far as cost, you can look kind of at what it took us to do fiscal years 20 and 21 monitoring. But if you engage an outside consultant that does it on an annual basis, they're able to more rotate the ones that they're doing and get to know the 30 programs that are being monitored and do it a lot more efficiently if you're doing it every single year on a recurring basis. We've seen a lot of cities outsource it very economically.
Okay, great, thanks. And going back to the technical assistance, if we were to do sort of periodic or regular technical assistance, it sounds, first of all, like you think that's something that we should do in-house. That isn't part of what should be outsourced. Is that correct?
I think the answer is both. If you kept everything in-house, obviously everything would stay in-house, right? But if you decide to outsource, what I would expect to see is the city retain that technical assistance on periodic basis to say, hey, ongoing reporting, ongoing programmatic needs, here's how all of that flows, and then partner with the outsourced consultant or entity to say, they're going to train you and they're going to provide you the in-depth technical assistance around desk reviews, site visits, expectations, and that process.
And obviously, if we were to recommend this to our staff, their first question would be, and how often do you want us to do this regular technical assistance update? Is there some best practice? Is it every 6 months or every year, or when a new grantee is brought on board? I'm just trying to get a sense, because obviously, to the extent we increase the amount of technical assistance we're providing from our staff, we have to have some understanding of what the burden on staff would be.
Yeah, I would say best practice says to do a holistic, it could be a 1 hour like brown bag session at lunch or something like that, right before reporting is due. So like the month or two prior to reporting, to refresh everybody on their requirements, update them on any changes that may have occurred during that, the 6 months prior. Or you could do it as little as annually, but I think 1 to 2 times a year, given the frequency of the ongoing reporting that's required, makes the most sense. And again, it could just be as simple as like a 1 hour session with maybe a half an hour for Q&A from your agencies.
And then with regard to some of the desk review outcomes, and some agencies apparently had some documentary challenges. I want to sort of understand, because you said you didn't see any evidence, for example, that there was fraud or anything being committed. It really was more, and I don't want to minimize it in any way, because documentation is obviously important, but it seemed to be more of a documentation issue than a real suspicion that money was being diverted or not spent appropriately. Would that be fair?
Yeah, definitely. It was more of the case that there was turnover even during the period of us running the project, right? And so it was just more of, where is it stored? Can we find it? Was it left on someone's personal drive, or is it in our shared space type situations? Less of, did it actually exist, and more of, where does it exist?
All right, and then my last question has to do with sort of going back to the overall recommendations. I get the sense, you've suggested that maybe we should streamline some of the reporting requirements. Is that a recommendation based on comparisons to what other municipalities may ask for? Because I know that, let me just start out by saying, I know some of the things that we ask for are perhaps the result of some experiences we've had with some agencies who have, for example, incredibly high board turnover. Literally, average term for someone serving on a board is 3 months, which, creates something of a red flag, that sort of thing. So is there some, again, best practice where we could look at and say, these are the things you really should be asking about? And then if we do take some of those reporting requirements off, is there also a way, maybe in the context of the desk review or something, to at least, sort of test for some of those red flags?
Yeah, definitely. I do think there are places to pull back. And I think I think part of that comes in with the line between, are you going to engage someone to do the outsourced part of that, and then have internal staff handle the ongoing monitoring, and differentiating that line. But looking at, are there correct signage posted in a building, what drive is a file saved on, things like that is kind of depth that we don't typically see. And if you pulled back in those areas, those are things that could be touched on during a desk review process, because the desk review isn't just about, can you provide me financial information that ties to the financial report? It's also looking at those basic internal controls that we expect to see. Like, are there approvals on POs? Are you approving timesheets? Do the timesheets tie to the pay stub that was paid and the check that was cut? So those are the kinds of controls that you could look into as part of the desk review process, kind of on a sample-based population, but more in depth than on the ongoing review basis.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I really appreciate the report, and I appreciate the answers. Thanks.
Great. Moving on to Member Brock.
So tagging on Council Mayor Davis's question, the last question, are there standards that you can provide us for the standard reporting periods? There are things that we should be asking, and then looking at the things that we are asking and saying, that's not typically done. How do we become more, I guess, if you will, industry standard in our reporting and in our requests, so that we don't have our staff spend so much time on unnecessary parts of the review process, unnecessary parts of the different processes?
Yeah, there
Have you
isn't.
included that in your report?
There isn't one place that I could send you as like, here's where you go, here's all the answers. That just isn't there. On the federal side of that, you could look at the uniform guidance that is put out by the federal government that says, here's your basic things that need to be done. But even that can get a little bit confusing for organizations. This is, again, another place where I think it would be beneficial to not, we reviewed your process, we provide recommendations, but I think this is where you could take it a step further and say, help me revamp that process. You just went through it, help me revamp it. And let's use your expertise, because we, organizations like Moss Adams and the group that I help support, we do this day in and day out. I live and breathe subrecipient monitoring. And let an organization like us come in and say, or another one even, say, here's what you're doing, here's how you could do it better, and let me help you develop what needs to be put into place to help you do this efficiently and effectively.
And I think that would be worthwhile. That would be something that we should talk about, probably either city council level or whatever other level we need to try and get those recommendations added on, because I think that's important. And contrary to one of the callers who said, oh my God, outsourcing, it takes an inordinate amount of staff time many times when we don't have sufficient staff to do these things. So I would be in favor of outsourcing, but also in favor of more consistent standards with other cities, with other municipalities, so that we cover the things that are necessary, but not over cover, if that makes sense. So I had a question. You had 15, you said 15 of the 19 organizations got gold stars. 2 sort of got not gold stars, but silver stars, and 2 were a problem. Are those in our report, or do you want to tell us who those were?
Yes, if you go to the very end of the report, in the appendices, you'll find appendices related to the surveys that we executed and the responses by agency and program. The same thing for the site visits and the desk reviews.
So what were the 2 that had some issues, and how did we relate those issues? Considering it's really an 8, so you kept saying at the start, we haven't audited for some time. Well, the sometime means 2014, 15, 16 in some instances. So what are the two that have moderate issues, and what kind of issues are those?
Yeah. Oops, sorry. I'm trying to get a
Because
copy.
people who are listening may not be able to access or spend time on looking through the report.
Yeah, understandable. So the ones that were higher risk are going to be that we considered higher risk were St. Joseph's Center and Claire Matrix. St. Joseph's Center, in some instances, wasn't able to provide almost anything that we needed to support the desk review, and the same went for Claire Matrix. So those would be the two that I would say, you know, if you wanted to do what we consider a deep dive into them, where you say for a given period, whether that's the full year that we reviewed or a subset of that, provide me 100% of the supporting documentation and let us review it. Those would be the two that I would consider doing that. Again, in conversation with them, I don't think there's anything nefarious going on there. I think it's turnover and where is the documentation?
And internal chaos. What were the two that did not comply at all?
So that would be those were St. Joseph's and Claire Matrix.
Okay, what were the two that were moderate?
Yes, LAFLA was one of them, and Family Services of Santa Monica.
What kinds of issues?
For family,
substantial or minor?
They were mostly minor in my mind. They were missing timesheets or payroll documentation. It wasn't that it wasn't there altogether. It was that we couldn't get it for every sample we selected. So there were processes in place. They could provide some of it. They just couldn't locate other pieces of it.
Okay, so that could be corrected by readdressing our requirements, and also making sure that we process this a lot quicker, so that the agencies, it sounds like, know that we are going to be coming back on a consistent basis with requests, and making sure that we help them have that documentation, or if we outsource it, the outsourcing company would have that responsibility. Okay, that was one thing. I think so. Oh, my question is, so we are supposed to be requesting documentation twice a year. I'm not sure how much we look at that documentation, and is it the proper documentation, or should we revise? Again, it goes with the earlier thing, revising what we're asking, and is twice a year the norm, in excess or too little? Should it be quarterly? Should it be twice a year, or annual compliance?
Yeah, so to address the first part of your question, on the programmatic side, I think there are definitely places you could pull back. On the financial side, the reports looked pretty consistent with what we typically see across different clients, whether that's municipalities or nonprofit organizations. Based off of the notes that I saw in those financial reports that were submitted, they're being looked at, and they're being looked at in depth and in detail. So I think you're doing okay in those realms. As far as the frequency of reporting, I think twice a year seems reasonable given the current staffing that you have, the amount of funds that are going out, and the day-to-day kind of interaction that HSGP personnel are having with the agencies that are executing the programs. I think going quarterly would probably be just a little bit of overkill, but I wouldn't go that far.
That's what I thought. And then in tune with that, and now I just lost, it just vanished somewhere. I think the other thing the last part of this is, I think you're recommending that grants, the norm should be biannual, correct? Or
the grant period?
Every 2 years, there should be a reapplication process for grants. Is that what you're suggesting?
I would say that makes sense. I would not go 8
What
years.
makes the most sense?
I definitely wouldn't go 8 years between grant application periods. I think that's really long from what I've seen. Most programs of the size that are being executed with your agencies are typically a 12 to 18-month service period. And by service period, I mean that's when they're actually executing the program. And then that gives you room for them to do reporting at the end, close out, all of that goes along with operating a grant. So I think
you're suggesting really a year and a half, with 2 years being the outside, that we should be looking, because that also means that we can be finding new agencies that may also give great service and have more innovative, nimble ideas that can help the people in the city we're really trying to help.
Not just that, but you could also, you don't have to shift funds from one organization to another. You could broaden the pool of where funds are going to support a broader population in your area. So that's also an option within that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Verville.
Thank you. So this process, reviewing these reports, is a little challenging for me because I guess the expectation after this meeting is that the report is final, and as Commission Member Brock just mentioned, some things he wants to see in the report, and so this kind of happened with the homelessness study report, and so I have a list of 25 questions that I put together. And I'm not exactly sure because there's not like a draft report that comes out that we can interact with, and then a final report that includes the addressing the questions. What the best way of dealing with this is. So I just want to set up my comments with that. Some high-level comments. One of the things that concerns me is when we talk about the need to handhold the grantees for all of the, and for the on-demand service and the other things. What that does is it increases the city's costs and it reduces the amount of city revenue or city resources that can be applied to these programs because it's being burned basically in the administrative process. And so one of the things is, especially given that the eight-year lifespan of a lot of these organizations, I get the sense that their problems are being transferred to the city, and that the city is basically the one that all of a sudden is its costs are going up to manage this because of the lack of structure in these organizations. And so that's that's kind of a very high level concern that I have, because everything that happens, every time something is touched, costs go up, and that means what our residents can benefit from goes down. So on top of that, again, I'm not sure if I should be going through all the questions, if I should send the questions as I did last time in and then have those questions addressed. I would really like to have the questions addressed in the report. So for example, one of the things when we did the risk analysis, or when you did the risk analysis in the report, one of the vendors basically had their accounting system didn't tie. And that was the people concern. So their GL and their ledgers didn't tie. So the question is, I don't know how much money, and that's another thing. The charts that you had did not indicate by agency what the spend was, because you just did it for 1 year, which is $8 million. But if we're looking at 8 years, that's $64 million, right? That has gone out to all of these agencies. So to help assess the risk, it would have been very helpful to be able to look at the nature of the problem and the amount of money that is going to that specific agency, so that you can get a better sense as to, do I worry about this a lot or do I worry about this a little bit? So like I said, for me, the fact that their accounting system doesn't tie is a huge red flag. And the other issue is that they're doing work on the homeless side. And so that means that the weaknesses that we're identifying here, we possibly could be overlapping into weaknesses in some of the other city programs. So and yet, given that, they were adjudged to be a low risk. And so, like the Clare Foundation in the homelessness report, when you outlined how much money was being spent for the Clare Foundation, they were budgeted at $30,000 in that timeline for the homeless report, and they spent zero. So in here, they're identified as a very high risk. But if they're only spending $10,000, that's not something I'm going to really worry about versus something like the people concerned if they're spending $1 million. So I think that getting a sense as to what the spends are for each of these agencies is very critical in the subcommittee's ability to assess risk across, and the city's ability to assess risk across these things. The other thing that concerned me was, for example, there's the funds that are going to these agencies are federal, local, and I would imagine some state community fund, and community funding that goes into that. I would imagine that those generators of funds have their own reporting requirements. I didn't see anything in the report that indicated that the problems that we're encountering in their reporting to us impacts our ability to report, to the extent that we have reporting responsibilities, to federal and other community resource providers. So that was a concern. Does the problem flow uphill? And there's also, the split between the city's general funds and the federal and local funds. It wasn't indicated how much of the $8 million is general funds versus these outside funds that may have their own reporting requirement. So that was another kind of challenge to get my head around what kind of risk are we looking at with these vendors. The other thing is there was no discussion in the report about the city's organizational structure that is in place that manages all of this. Is it one organization? Is it spread out across multiple organizations? Is there a specific individual who's in charge of this, of all of this, and they have an organization? Or are there other issues, or is it much more decentralized? So that by itself then would indicate how hard or how easy it is for us to basically streamline the kinds of things that we're asking for. But without understanding what that looks like, it was very difficult for me to, again, get my head around what that looks like. And again, the long tenure of these agency contracts indicate to me that by now they should understand the city's processes. I mean, they should understand the reporting requirements. And to the extent that they don't understand them, and the city has to incur costs and has to basically dedicate its manpower to helping them understand that, if they've been with us for 8 years, there's a challenge there. I mean, and so the question then becomes, does that kind of weakness, especially after such a long period, does that impact the way we view, and to the extent that should that impact the way that we view their qualification to remain a vendor to the city? Because again, it's a challenge to see the amount of money and resources the city has to dedicate to handholding, but then they've been here for 8 years. So that means that they don't have policies and procedures. We had an excellent presentation today from our HR group that has updated their policies and procedures so that new people that come in know exactly what to do. It sounds to me like none of that is happening with the agencies that we have, which is a huge concern. And again, I didn't see that, as a risk, as an identified risk in the report. Because what's happening is the city is now in charge of training their new employees. And I really don't think that that's really should be the way the city views its role in these kinds of things. We talked about the renewal process. There's just a few other things. As I said, I have 25 questions. I even put together a chart that kind of shows the relative risk assessments, and yet, it's not consistent. The ones with more with a higher percentage of problems is not necessarily the one that has a higher risk assessment. And then the risk assessments, as I said, don't have the length, it doesn't have the dollars. And so it's just very difficult to get my head around. On one of the charts on Appendix A, also there was a few missing data items. So there were blanks for example, Providence St. John's Health Center. There was no, the chart was missing the information on the Child Youth Development Project. And on the WISE Healthy Aging, the chart was missing completely the data on the Los Angeles Oasis project. And the Growing Place Marine Park, program-specific P&Ps, that was missing as well. So the chart was basically incomplete. So with that, I mean, this is a laundry list of things, and I'm just kind of searching here for the best way to incorporate this. I think, what I'd like to do is do what I did last time and email this into the city. I think that the same protocol applies today, which is the only way my comments I think can get in. But I really would like to see those comments addressed in the final report, just as Subcommittee member Brock has some comments that he'd like to see in the report. And I think even Subcommittee member Davis had some great observations that probably should be in the final report. So with that, I'd like to send these in, and I'd like to make a motion that Moss Adams reviews these questions and incorporates the answers in their final report. That was a long-winded session. I'm sorry.
Possibly before we go to a motion, Mark, Vice Chair Verville, maybe we could get a response from the Moss Adams team.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We would handle the questions that he has, similar to what we did on the prior report, where they are submitted to city staff. We work directly with city staff to provide the responses. It looks like last time his questions were added as an attachment to the prior meeting agenda. My understanding from the audit subcommittee charter, as well as the internal audit charter, is that the reports are always finalized with management, and then they are presented to the audit subcommittee. I have not seen processes in the past that have provided for making updates to a finalized report. So I would have to check in with Colleen if that's an option. Otherwise, it would be where we provide the responses back along with city staff and submit that back to the committee.
As long as they get addressed, I guess that's okay. But that one of the things I think as an engaged audit subcommittee, I'm not sure if we should be reviewing the idea that the reports always come to us in final form versus maybe a draft that we get to comment on and then a final form that comes in. It just as a very I think everybody on this committee is extraordinarily interested in helping the city move forward, and the process just seems to be kind of a challenge at this point.
Well, I think we just heard from Ms. Garcia, Haley, that the charter says that they will come forth as final. So we'll have to go look at that if we have concerns.
Okay.
So I would recommend that we do move ahead with what we did previously with the homelessness report, and you submit your questions during the meeting as public input, and that we move forward as we did before. Is that something you would welcome?
Raised.
Pardon me?
Chair, my hand is raised and has been raised for a couple of minutes. This is
excuse me, I'm so sorry, I missed you.
Okay, so I concur with Mark, because I was disturbed in the last report on homelessness that Mark's what I consider were substantial questions. By the time they come back just in written form at the end of a report, the public and everyone else misses out on those answers, which I believe are an integral part of the report. So either we have to have in each one of these cases some sort of follow-up short session to discuss those questions and the answers, or as Mr. Verville said, this should come back in draft form and then a follow-up meeting, because I was disturbed that the questions that were raised during the homelessness report really weren't answered in a way that our residents who were paying for the report could see. So I think that's very important. And I think some of the points that Mark just raised are extremely important as well. So I don't know if you have to give us a cost on how much it would cost for you to come back for a shortened session, but I really feel just getting written answers and throwing them in the back of the report buries it. And I think there are many residents in this city who are concerned about the grant organizations, and our process is fair to choose them. And in fact, if we put a microscope on the people concerned, with all the different things that they are involved in our city, from Samuel Shell to Turning Point to the hamster team, to street homeless services, things like that. Are we making sure our residents satisfied that they are doing a great job overall? And I know that point has been raised many times. So from what the questions are that Mark is asking, I believe that they deserve answers, and they deserve answers that can be shared in a meeting like this or in person. Thank you.
Okay, so going back to Vice Chair Verville, how would you like to proceed?
Who is the city contact? Last time that I sent questions in, I sent them into Nikema Newsom. Is that the same person, or is it somebody else I should be adding to this?
Gigi, I believe, is that still the city contact that the vice chair should send it to?
Sure. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and I will copy Gigi as well, and I will copy Chair Vandenberg.
Mark, I'd like to see the questions as well.
I will copy you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I put everybody on the subcommittee on this?
Sure, please do so.
All
Thank
right.
you. So while you're doing that, I'm just going to check in with Member Para. Did you have any other follow-up questions, Member Para?
Thank you for checking in. No, I'm good.
Okay, thanks.
I think I've got everyone. So Member Para, Member Davis, Member Brock, Chair Vandenberg, and myself, and that's it, right?
Well, as long as you get it to the, make sure you get it to the city clerk.
Yep, it's gone.
Okay. So what I believe from what I've heard in the discussion between Member Brock and Member Verville was that we clearly want the answers to these questions. And I think maybe the next point is, how do we want it? And the discussion is it acceptable for how it went last time with the homelessness report in terms of the city working together with Moth Adams to give answers in the manner that they did before? Or is, I think the other option that's being discussed is looking to actually work to update the actual physical report, which would definitely require additional funds, I'm estimating. So Vice Chair Verville, what's your proposal going forward?
My first choice, given the importance of this, my first choice would be to have this formally addressed in the report. And I think that is because that is the report. The format of the answers to my questions in the homeless report were extraordinarily difficult to get through. Many of my questions, I think about half of my questions were answered, and the other half were basically consolidated. And it was, the formatting was I had to reformat it just so I could read it myself. So if that's the kind of response that we're going to get, you know, I would just very much favor doing it right the first time and getting it into the body of the formal report, so that from there everybody has one document and they're looking at, and everyone can focus on that singular document, and it's, you know, all inclusive.
Okay.
Committee, this is Doug.
Please go ahead. Thank you,
Just
City
to be
Attorney.
safe, I'd recommend that send the questions to the clerk and have her distribute it to everybody as well as the public at the same time. Does that work for you all?
Is Nikita the clerk?
Send the questions to the clerk, who can distribute the questions to everybody on the committee as well as the public at the same time.
Right.
She
is
one of the clerks. She's an assistant clerk.
Okay.
So does that satisfy Doug's requirement, or do I need to put the clerk as well?
No, I mean the clerk's office.
Okay, so is there an email for the clerk's office generically?
No,
Clerk
just
at
do it.
santamonica.gov.
Yeah.
Right.
It's what?
That's a bit safer under the Brown Act.
Clerk at santamonica.gov.
Okay, and of course my machine is now freezing up on me, because I require technology right now, and that's when technology decides to fail.
Fail you. All right. Well, while we're waiting for technology to move ahead, so Moss Adams, what's your comments or feedback about looking to integrate these questions into the report, and what are your thoughts around that?
We will have to work with city staff to review what we're even allowed to do, what's permitted by charter, given that we present the final report. I'm not sure if there's flexibility in that we can go back and amend a final report that's presented, or whether it would have to be an appendix or update of some sort. We would also need to look at the substance of questions and which portions are within the scope of the work that was already done and could be answered, versus which portion are questions that would need to be answered by HSGP or the city staff themselves.
All right. So with that, I believe that we would need to move forward. Do you want to do a motion, Vice Chair, regarding requesting that this committee ask for that to be addressed in a discussion, or move ahead with it given that discussion?
I'm sorry.
I'll suggest a motion, Mark.
Could you
That way
please?
it's a little
I'm
more
trying. This whole
Okay.
thing-
Than just direction.
I apologize. This technology is just doesn't cooperate. Microsoft Teams is interfering
Mike?
with.
Mark, did you decide to do a motion or not?
What I'm trying to do is get this out.
No, don't worry about getting that out now. Just worry about the chair's question. Do you want to do a motion or just give direction?
I would like to introduce a motion that requests Moss Adams to come back to us to let us know if the answers to my questions can be included in the final report. Is that a proper motion, I think?
I would just give it more. I direct Moss Adams to answer the questions that Vice Chair Birdville has submitted, with both written answers and a brief presentation at our next audit committee meeting. Do I have a second on that? This. No?
Can you
Second.
rephrase?
Second or no?
I would be
Hearing none, I
supportive.
guess that's-
I would be supportive of a
Oh.
motion that includes having a dialogue between Moss Adams and the city regarding the city, whatever our charter is for the audit subcommittee to investigate that, and what would be the feasibility / cost of integrating Vice Chair Vervil's comments directly into the report. Something more to that
I
line.
would approve of that amendment.
Okay.
But there still has to be a second.
I will second that.
Can we have a rewording or re-discussion of that motion, please?
Can the clerk give us something?
Oh my goodness.
Maria, good luck.
Sorry about
from
that. I
what
just didn't write it down. That was off the cuff.
From what I understood, Vice Chair Verbil would like his questions incorporated into would like Moss Adams to come back on whether or not they can incorporate the answers to his questions in the next report or the next presentation. And Chair Vandenberg, I think I'm going to need help with your
Right. Well,
with your.
Yeah, let's back off. So I think the motion that got stated and approved was what I said, which was I would like to have Moss Adams work with the city regarding the ability, the feasibility, and the cost to integrate Vice Chair's questions into the actual report that we've seen tonight. And come back to us with feedback and comments.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
My pleasure. Okay, and you seconded that, Mark, Vice Chair?
I second that. Thank you.
Okay, is there any discussion about that motion? Okay, can we have a roll call on that, please?
Yes, Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verville,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Motion passes. We'll go from there. Yes. Thank you, Ms. DeCavalalis. I never say your last name, Gigi. Welcome.
Thank you. I wanted to ask if Mark Amaral from our Community Services Department could come in. He does want to address one of the questions that came up about the 2-year grant cycle.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks, Gigi.
Thank you, Gigi. Thank you, committee members. Yes, I was listening to your conversation. I did want to address the idea of a 2-year grant cycle. I think one thing that's really important to understand is that the level of administrative burden that procuring for a grant cycle puts upon city staff. And I just wanted to give you a general arc of the timeline for the process of our most recent procurement. It takes staff roughly 8 to 12 months to develop an RFP, complete with assessment of needs and community input, and lead time to go to council, and then to get council's input on that RFP and approval for release. And subsequent to council approval, this year we're giving agencies 9 months to both apply, have proposals scored, and go back to council for approval just in advance of a biennial budget cycle. And that timeline itself is very, very tight. So if we were to consider moving to something like a 2-year cycle, we'd be looking at re-entering RFP development later this fall, just a mere few months after our new contracts were executed. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that context when we talk about 2-year cycles, 4-year cycles, to bring in a little bit about what it takes city staff to pull that off and what we normally see our timeline looking like for that, because I think it might be helpful for this committee to hear that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming forth with that. Appreciate that.
I have a question before he leaves.
Sure. Vice Chair Verval has a question for you.
And this is also for Moss Adams. So one of my questions is, has the city been given a comprehensive listing of best practices? And this specific issue that Mark brings up, I think, is something that would I'd love to know what is best practice for these kinds of award processes. Because if Moss Adams is suggesting that a 2-year cycle is industry standard, that means that these other cities are doing something else and they have a different kind of process that isn't as involved as what you've just outlined. And so if that's the case, I think that's something that needs to be, pretty importantly investigated to understand what it is that we are doing or not doing that's reducing our ability to generate options to improve the effectiveness of our process and of our spend. I'm very concerned about the complete gap between what you just described and what Moss Adams has described as best practices.
If I could clarify, our assessment was focused on the desk reviews and the site visits, so the monitoring that occurs in the current period. Our assessment did not involve looking at the pre-award, the evaluation of how applications are managed, how awards are being given out, the RFP cycle. The comment on the 2 years was a comment around, we typically see funding cycles or program periods that are shorter in nature, 12 to 24 months, not necessarily in regards to how often are we putting it back out to RFP, accepting applications, and doing additional awards. That was outside the scope of the work that we did. So I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding.
I completely understand that this is outside the scope of the work. What I'm saying is this brings up an extraordinarily important issue, right? Outside the scope of this existing report that I think is highlighted by the gap between what was just described and the 2-year cycle. Because if you're going to have a 2-year funding cycle, somehow you need to be more nimble. If in fact that funding cycle says, let's say the agency is falling down and we need to find a new agency. If a 2-year funding cycle allows that kind of evaluation to happen, but the evaluation process itself is a 2-year evaluation process, there's a gigantic disconnect. So this is not for this report, completely understand, but I think this is something that should be considered as an area to be evaluated.
Thank you. Moving on to Member Brock and then Member Davis, please.
Well, you pretty much took the thunder, what I was going to say, away from me, Mr. Verville. However, yeah, I'd like to know, just as an aside, how long does it take most cities to do the RFP? Because that seems, is that the norm? Because to me, that seems somewhat extraordinarily long, considering a lot of the grants, I would presume, if we look back over the last 10 years, a majority of the grants may be the same people. Yes, I know we had an 8-year gap, but even before that. So is there a way, and you won't be able to answer this now, I know that, but is there a way to simplify and expedite our process? And the thing that I was keyed in on from Mark was, if someone isn't performing and we have to remove that grantee, how quickly can we let that RFP back out for a new grantee? How do we keep those processes moving? Is there a faster, better way? I don't know the answer, but I'm posing that, and you don't have to answer that now either, but I think we'd love to hear about that. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Mark.
Member Davis, please.
Well, I think everyone sort of understands this, but I think it's important that it be enunciated in this meeting to the extent someone doesn't. We do not have an 8-year grant cycle. What we had was a much shorter grant cycle, and then we had COVID. And then we had financial problems. And so typically, prior to this last sort of 8-year cycle, we had a much shorter grant cycle, and we were able to operate within that shorter grant cycle. It wasn't 2 years. If I remember correctly, and Gigi may be able to correct me on this, I think it was originally 3 years, and then we may have extended it to 4 because we again moved our whole city budgeting process. We used to budget every year, and then we moved to what effectively was a 2-year budget. And so the 3-year grant cycle didn't really fit well within that, right? Because 3 is sort of 3/4 of the way through the 4-year cycle. So I'm not suggesting that, we can't rethink this, but I don't want everyone to walk away from this thinking that we've had this extraordinarily long funding cycle for years and years and years. This was just something that was originally the result of our changing the way we did budgeting to sort of conform more to that sort of 4-year rather than every year cycle. And then, of course, COVID came and we didn't have the staff to really revisit that. So I think that's important to remember. And I think the second thing is that we have gone through situations where we've had to address issues with grantees who were not performing. And it's a difficult process at best. I'll just leave that there. And so, I certainly think we need to, maybe in a larger context as a city council, have that discussion about how often does it really make sense to do the grants program, and then how do we address it when someone isn't performing? Because literally the last agency that we had that wasn't performing, it took, if I remember correctly, 2 or 3 grant cycles to sort of address that issue. Now, a lot of that was because we really bent over backwards to try and help them perform. We provided a lot of technical assistance. We hired third-party financial folks to help them out. And they, there were still issues with them meeting the requirements of our grant processes. So I just think it's important to understand that, while everything that Moss Adams did here was related to a particular time period, some of what we're talking about in the bigger scheme of things is not our typical grant process, but something that has happened, just because of a children's book, a series of unfortunate events. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that, because I think it sounds like we're being a little critical of city staff when really a lot of what happened was not their fault, but the result of external factors over which they had no control.
Thank you. Vice Chair Verville.
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize that I'm not so concerned about what committee member Davis just mentioned. I'm more concerned about the cycle times that was just described in the entire process of trying to identify and get RFPs out for new agencies, and that's the process today. So everything that Subcommittee member Davis just mentioned is in the past, but today's process sounds like it has a gigantic cycle time. And so the question then becomes, if we identify issues with agencies, that cycle time applies today, and I think it severely impacts our ability to timely address issues and timely identify alternative vendors. That's my focus on this point. I'm aware that there have all kinds of things have happened in the past, but what we just heard this evening was the cycle times now, and we're looking at the risks of these agencies today, and the question is, how does the city become more nimble in its ability to manage the swapping out process as we go forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Member Brock, you have your hand raised. Member Brock, you have your hand down. Congratulations.
He's
all right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I would definitely like to thank Ariel and your other colleague for presenting this, very much so. And I would be looking for a motion to receive and file this and the comments associated with it.
I'll move.
Thank you.
I'm confused on the motion. So the motion is to receive and file with the answers to the questions?
I would say that it's just the comments that were made today. So the other motion is what we've approved and we've sent on to staff.
So we're receiving and filing what may be an interim report.
Well, I think I'd have to talk to the city attorney to make sure, because I don't know that this would be considered an interim report if the charter says that these reports are final, as possibly stated by Moss Adams.
So my hand is raised again. I would not suspect that the charter says that. I think that would be what our contract with Moss Adams is for this project. And that's what we're asking for as an adjustment. Can we receive the report, quote unquote, without filing and putting the report away?
Mr. City Attorney,
Doug?
what are your comments on that?
Well, I'd need to take a look at both the charter documents and the contract, but you could make a motion to accept, receive and file now, subject to considering it again, should you be allowed to. And we'll take.
I will make that motion.
All right. Is there a second?
I can second that.
Second that. All right. Let's move into roll call vote.
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verbal,
Yes.
and Chair Vanderberg.
Yes, thank you very much. Let's move on to item 6. Once again, Moss Adams will be presenting the capital assets internal controls testing. And Haley, are you going to present?
Thank you. I will be passing it over to Chelsea Ritchie, which was the senior manager on this project.
Welcome, Chelsea. Welcome to the Santa Monica Audit Subcommittee. We're happy to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you all. And because this report is rather short, it was 9 pages, we did not do a PowerPoint, so this will be just a verbal presentation.
I think many people are saying bless you. So thank you.
I did want to say, you know, looking at the meeting minutes, it does start on page 43 of 58 of the PDF that was sent out today. So if you do want to follow along. So Moss Adams was contracted by the city of Santa Monica to evaluate and test internal controls related to the city's capital asset management function. So really what this included were reviewing the processes of acquisitions, the classifications of assets, tracking, maintenance, and the retirement of assets, as well as really assessing the adequacy of the asset management functions. So how did we do this? Going on to page 3 of the report, our procedures performed included having interviews and inquiries with city staff members. Relatively, this was with the finance department. We also inquired with water, which included the water operations and wastewater sections of the department, as well as fleet and the Big Blue Bus division. We looked at many documents, so this included policies and procedures, you know, any schedules that the city could offer, and as well as the divisions, preventative maintenance schedules, replacement schedules, that sort of nature. We also performed detailed testing. So in particular, our detailed testing was within asset additions. So looking at a sample of additions by the GL and really obtain all supporting documentation available to support the related purchase and tested for those additions. We also looked at receiving and tagging. So through our interviews with the divisions that I discussed earlier on, we inquired about their processes and how they look at asset purchasing, receiving, tagging, and monitoring. We looked at preventative maintenance schedules, as well as asset replacement forecasts. We also looked into disposal, transfers, and transfers of assets. So once again, selected a sample and made sure that they followed both policy as well as best practices. We also looked at physical inventory counts. So we requested all documentation related to the most recent capital asset inventory that was performed, and really helped, that we wanted documentation that helped support the physical counts, documentation of who performed these counts, so on and so forth. We also looked into GASB 2021-1. So this is a new implementation guidance that the city was wanting us to look into to make sure that they were going to be following this appropriately in the future, as well as they wanted us to evaluate their capitalization thresholds. I do want to commend the city. When we looked at their policy and procedure, this is a great backbone of a policy. And, when we have compared to many other cities, it has a lot of great qualities to it. Also, another great thing was that it was last reviewed in 2022. So this is something that the city is constantly looking at and aware of. Also, readiness for change. During our interviews with staff members, they were always open to hear how they could better improve processes and really wanted to know our input in this. So overall, we only had 2 observations within this report. One being the capital asset physical inventory counts. So a city-wide physical inventory of all capital assets had not been performed in the past 2 years, as well as citywide spot checks or, audits throughout had not been established. And, really what's the risk in this? This can result in inaccurate financial reporting, a lack of accountability, and making sure that asset additions, disposals, and transfers are being, reported timely. So our recommendation to the city on this is consider developing a policy to develop a risk-based approach for performing full physical inventory counts and incorporating spot checks and audit checks that are monitored at the city-wide level. And then also huge proponent of policies and procedures. So making sure to update those policies to really reflect more comprehensive guidance and requirements for performing an effective inventory. Our second observation was over capital asset receiving and tagging. So receiving and tagging of capital assets was not consistently performed, and in some cases documented. And related policies and procedures in this area were also not developed. So recommendation from Moss Adams require consistent controls to be applied for the receiving and the tagging of those capital assets, as well as developing those policies and procedures to really promote consistency and requirements and practices in that area. That is all I have to report. So open to questions.
Well, thank you. We'll get to questions in a minute. We do want to ask if there's any speakers that would like to address the capital assets internal controls testing report by Moss Adams. Maria, is there anybody out there?
If anyone would like to speak, please press the raise hand button or *5 if you're on the phone. Looks like we do not have any requests to speak.
Thank you for that feedback. Let's move on to discussion and questions of the report. Vice Chair Verville, please go ahead. Mark, I think you're muted.
So 2 questions. What was done around, if anything, around asset impairments and the policies and procedures around evaluating impairments?
Yeah, so that we did not look into that. So that was not the scope of this audit. So the scope was really evaluating the internal controls within the assets, dispositions, and transfers within the city.
Right, but asset impairment and value write-downs is part of the capital process, right? Okay. And you talked about asset acquisition levels. Does the city have clear policies that prevent, for example, a bunch of related purchases from not being consolidated and classed as one asset, so that they get expensed rather than go through the capital acquisition process? Or is it? I mean, are the policies and procedures very clear around, how purchases are grouped together, and then how that is compared to the threshold versus how individual purchases can be expensed if they're below the threshold?
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned before, the city does have very good policies and procedures around capitalization thresholds. And, this really was looking at the internal controls of how, from an asset being purchased all the way until being disposed. As their external audit is going to be looking at their expense accounts thoroughly to make sure that sort of nature of assets being, that should have been capitalized, and, being incorrectly expensed. So that was something that we really didn't look into, because we know that their external auditors are going to be looking at that heavily when they look at capital assets.
Are the external auditors looking at impairments?
Oh, Haley?
I was just responding to one point of clarification. We did look at, during the audit period of 2019 to 2021, we did look for what Vice President or Vice Chair was referring to as far as the split purchases. We did look at for expenses that were coded to repairs and maintenance to see if there were signs of potential miscoding and putting smaller purchases that should have been lumped up to a capital asset.
Great. Do the external auditors look at the asset impairment process and the policies and procedures around those when they do their internal controls testing?
Typically, if it's material to the financials, which given the volume of the assets and the materiality, yes, they do look more heavily into asset impairments and the city's practices around that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from committee members? I just have one question, well, maybe two. So you focus a lot on water, Blue Blue Bus, and the fleet management. How did you do coverage on the rest of the assets? I mean, was it just a small amount, or what was the decision about how to look at the large dollar items versus the actual processes across all departments?
So our asset additions, disposals, and receiving and asset additions and the disposals and transfers, that was looking at across citywide assets.
So did you take samples, or how did you do that? I just didn't see it in the report. I'm sorry,
yes.
Maybe I missed it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you did do it across all departments. Okay.
That's correct.
That's good to hear. And then in terms of the recommendations, they're going to have to be really centralized in terms of pulling together something that's standardized and integrated and validated and made sure that it's working. So is that currently done in finance, Gigi, or who's going to do that with this particular recommendations?
I'll let
Hi.
Stephanie speak on that.
Oh,
Hi.
okay.
I am Stephanie Manglaris. I'm the Financial Operations Manager.
Nice to meet you.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So I think the recommendations have to be across the city, right?
So-
Many of these reports are city or division focused, So this is a
Absolutely.
situation where we have something that really has to be across the city, at least in my assessment. So I was just looking to how that would be managed, or your thoughts around that.
So we would monitor everything citywide. we would look and evaluate at what each of the different divisions is doing. Part of what we want to do is establish a citywide policy. I actually want to, if I could, we do have a, we had prepared a management response, and I would like just to discuss the capital asset policy. So management agrees it's now time to create a comprehensive citywide capital asset policy that incorporates not only these recommendations citywide, but also other best practices. Mark, I think that would address your concern. Establishes the standards for all city staff to adhere to when managing or using capital assets, documents the internal controls necessary to safeguard the city's capital assets, and clarifies the roles and responsibilities. And I think that that's what you're bringing up is the roles and responsibilities. I think that it's going to have to be a citywide effort. We're going to have to depend on the departments to do some of this work and then monitor, and then finance will also have to do some of the work, the spot checks, the annual review. Now, my response is actually much longer, but let me just be clear. I want to temper expectations. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had a high-level accountant retire, and financial reporting gave up that position in response to the global pandemic and the loss of revenues. We have not been able to get that position back, and that is part of why I think we're going to have to really strategize on how we move forward. Even when we do develop the capital asset policy, we're going to have to be strategic on how we focus, because we don't have the resources to do quite as much work as we might otherwise do, and we won't in the near future.
Well, I guess my response to that is we are going to represent our capital assets appropriately, though, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
The representation in terms of financially on the books, I don't know if you saw in the latter part, there was a recommendation on how to record assets on a more timely basis. We acknowledge that we should record assets throughout the year. We just don't have the resources, so we do it at the fiscal year end as part of that process. Once we get additional resource, so they're all going on the books. The financials are accurate, but to do this on a more regular basis, we're going to need additional resources.
I understand that the recommendations are pretty clear on how to move ahead. So we want to do that, and we obviously want to do it as timely as possible. So that's good feedback, and we need to make sure we're recording our assets timely and accurately. So appreciate that. Vice Chair Verville, do you have another comment?
Yeah, that just triggered a thought. Normally, what happens is if the internal control processes are not completely developed or out, then at the end, the year-end audit usually has a much deeper testing cycle, right? And in other words, the audit does not rely on internal controls. The audit relies on the scope of the testing. So I guess what's happening here, from what I can piece together, is that the audit is probably costing us a bit more because the testing has to be much more extensive in order to sign off on the assets module.
The internal controls are in place.
The internal controls, then, if the internal controls are in place, what is it that we're not going to be able to implement then appropriately?
Each of the different, in terms of establishing a citywide policy for capital assets and the degree with which we will monitor this going forward will need to be on a more strategic basis. In other words, for example, recording capital assets. There's a number of capital assets we can't record until year end. If there's something being built, we'll record that at year end because it doesn't make sense really to pull that on as it's being built. Vehicles we used to do throughout the year. As we would purchase the vehicles, we would put them into the financial system. Now we're doing it a little bit later in the year, based on our available resources. It doesn't mean that there aren't other internal controls in place, and it doesn't mean that there are audit issues with our external auditors. We would like to get to a point where we're doing more extensive work, and that's what we're going to have to strategically pick and choose what we're going to do. And let me also point out that, of course, when you're strategizing, you're looking for the areas of risk. That's what we do. And so we would look at the highest risk areas first and foremost, if there are any, and then spot check across the board. But there are no internal control issues noted during the audit.
Okay. And when you're and on projects that are in process, that's when you do the estimate, the percentage of completion or whatever, and that's how you put that on the books at year end. And that's what's getting audited by the auditors.
But we do record those at the end of the year. We put it in construction in progress. And but we do acknowledge there are other assets that we could capitalize throughout the year to get it onto the books earlier.
Right, but you're saying it by the end of the year, the
everything
balance
is on
sheet and the income statement is clean.
Yes, of course.
Yes, that's fine. Okay.
And we will be coming back to you in a month, and you'll see that we have already got the opinion letter, and it's a clean audit. It's not that there are internal control weaknesses, but we would like to be monitoring these because we want to safeguard the assets. We want to monitor them more closely. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, Stephanie, thank you so much for your feedback. I think we are looking for a motion to receive and file this report, the Capital Assets Internal Controls Testing Report by Moss
I
Adams.
shall move.
Thank you, Member Brock.
I'll second.
Thank you, Member Para. With that, we'd like a roll call.
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verbal,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it from Moss Adams. Appreciate meeting you, Chelsea, and appreciate you seeing again, Haley. And we're going to move on to the internal audit status report that I assume Haley is going to give. And I'm going to let Vice Chair Verval take control. If I don't plug in a power cord soon, I think my computer is going to go dead. So I'll be right back. So please go ahead, Mark.
Yes, well, I guess we're ready to hear the report.
Okay. It is on page 57 and 58 at the very end of your package. Would you like me to share the screen with the update or just verbally give it?
Whatever you think is most effective.
Okay, leave it up to me. All right, I will share my screen. Okay. You can see it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, the top two here, we reported tonight. So that's just reporting the closeout of both of those projects as far as presenting those final reports. The two I want to focus on are the two that are currently in process and have current and upcoming activities. So the first one here at the bottom of page 57 is the airport property management study. As a reminder, this has been going on, and this is a follow-up on the 2020 real estate study recommendations for the airport and an assessment of the opportunities to improve property management system utilization, efficiency, and effectiveness. This period, we developed preliminary observations, conducted our analysis, provided a draft report, and reviewed that draft report with the city. Upcoming in the next about month, we'll be revising that draft report based on city feedback, and we'll be finalizing. The second ongoing project right now is the enterprise risk assessment. That kicked off in January and is slated to be completed between now and May. That project identifies, analyzes, and measures risk by the level of inherent vulnerability, the level of preparedness to mitigate them, and the impact such negative events could have on the city should they occur. During this period in January and February to date, we've kicked off that project, submitted document request list, we've scheduled the interviews, and we've launched the staff survey. In the next reporting period, we'll be going forward with conducting field work and analysis, delivering our preliminary observations, and drafting the report. Stop presenting. Open it up for questions.
Before we do that, our agenda indicates us to ask for any speakers who have any comments about the internal audit status report. Maria?
If there are any public speakers, please press the raise hand button or *5 to request to speak. I do not see any requests to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Okay, we're on to the discussions and questions of Haley. Vice Chair Verville, do you have a question? You're on mute, Mark.
Sorry about that. Technology is just not my forte this evening. I'm a little confused on the enterprise risk assessment because I thought that the scope of this was going to be run by the audit subcommittee before the project commenced. And I see that the project is already, has already been kicked off. So because there was something, there's a risk item that I think is very critical that I do not see in this project. So was the assessment actually run by the audit subcommittee before it was launched for scoping?
We have Annie Rose on the call tonight. I believe she can answer that question.
Hello, nice to see you all. And actually, I'm going to flag this for Gigi because I think that we had brought an overview of this project to the last committee. Gigi, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would agree. The audit subcommittee had talked about this, the risk assessment back in May. We brought it back and any information could have come up at that point. We didn't get any additional questions or requests for any kind of different scope. We also have brought it up in terms of the internal audit status reports, even back in November, and we didn't hear anything. The risk assessment is very similar to what we did. The scope is, I would say, almost exactly what we did or what Moss Adams did back in 2017 or 2018. So the same areas are going to be taken a look at, and I believe, Annie Rose, you can correct me, but that is what your best practice risk assessment is.
Yep, that's exactly correct. That's the only thing I was going to add is that we have a pretty standardized scopes for all of the enterprise risk assessments that we perform for cities. And so this is following that same process and pattern as well.
Okay, so my concern lies in the city council's decision-making process and the information that's basically being presented to the council for them to make decisions. And in the homeless report on page 41, Moss Adams noted that there were issues of data collection, irregularities in the city's measurement methodology. But part of the problem was that it was hard to actually communicate these problems because the communication is through staff narrative reports to the council. And so the staff narrative report process is concerning to me because when I look at, for example, consent items, or I look at the budget process, it's all primarily narrative. And the amount of analysis that's presented to the council to help them make decisions usually consists of the request amount and the actual coding to the accounts that it's going to go to. But it doesn't actually indicate the original budget, variance to budget, any kind of scope additions from the original, from when the budget was originally approved, and that's for projects. For the budget itself, for example, it's a 2-year budget. I guess it's biannual. I always get that term wrong. So it's a 2-year cycle. The first year, there's quite a bit of analysis, department, there's the head count, there's quite a bit of information that's in the package. Now, I have 2 comments about that. I've seen budget packages scale 1,800 pages, and they're routinely over 1,000 pages. But in the packages, and I'm thinking about the last budget, the second year of the 2-year budget process, there was not even it was all narrative. There was some quantification, but there's not, for example, a summary. For example, there wasn't a roll forward summary that said, this was our first-year budget. These are the actuals against the first-year budget. These are the variances, and this is how these variances are impacting our second year, how we're tweaking the second-year budget. And the level of detail, for example, in the second-year budget is nowhere near what it is in the first-year budget. And I understand that the idea is that it carries forward, but the reporting on the performance in the first year, again, is all handled through narrative, and then only the changes are kind of discussed. And even the changes, some of them are in table format, some of them are in narrative format. So I just find that there's a huge challenge in the staff in the council, some of whom are not, they don't have a financial background, but the level of analysis and summary that comes up is challenging. On the project side, one of the things that caught my attention early on that was concerning, and I still don't have the answers about it today, was in the July 27th council meeting, July 27th of 2021, the Arcadia Water Treatment Plant came up as a consent item, and it was a $78 million consent item, $78,600,000. And basically the only number was the $78 million. And it just seemed odd that it was, it's a large consent item, but there was no other analysis. There was no original budget. There was nothing accompanying this. It was all just narrative. And the narrative always gives all the history in the background, but not really the numbers in the history in the background. So, in digging into this, it turned out that it appears, and it's not definitive, but I had to do quite a bit of digging, that the original budget was something like $46 million. There was an adjustment to the original budget, and this was in December of 19, of $8 million, bringing the operating budget to $55 million, but the request was for $78 million. So, but there was no variance analysis. There was no discussion about why there was such a gap between these things. And so, the way the information is being presented to the council, I think, is not informing the decision-making process. And I think that is a critical weakness in the ability of the city to make really informed, or the ability of the city's leadership to make really informed judgments. On this water treatment thing, I mentioned this to a city employee who's in the water division. He goes, well, no, we didn't go over budget by 30% or 40%. I think there was a second project in there. Well, there was no discussion of a second project in the narrative. So I'm not sure how all this comes together, but I do know that without a rigorous benchmarking and an ability to summarize, let's say that second year of the budget in a PowerPoint that's maybe no more than 30 pages, right? Rather than having 1,800 pages and the list of attachments is legendary, right? I'm very concerned that the ability of the city's leadership to make appropriate decisions is for lack of a better word, compromised by the fact that the amount of information they're getting to make these decisions is not that as robust as it could be. And that was an item that I was hoping to see included in this risk analysis.
Well, you are in luck, Mark, because reporting, analysis, and decision-making is definitely in scope for an enterprise risk assessment if it is determined that there are issues that are a serious impingement or threat to the city.
Well, excellent. Well, I would like to make sure that this specific issue of the narrative formats that are being used and having Moss Adams look at some of these budget, you go into the city agenda. I mean, the council members get this maybe 7 days or 6 days ahead of a meeting, and there's 1,800 pages, right? So I think that this needs to be specifically addressed in the report that's going to be issued on the risks in the city. I think because this is a massive decision-making risk. And if need be, I'd like to put a motion together that specifically directs Moss Adams to include a review of this specific issue.
So 2 pieces on that. One, our scope is confirmed for this particular enterprise risk assessment, but within that, we will absolutely be looking at reporting and decision making. So that is an area that is within scope and something we will be looking at. In terms of how it does or does not show up in the report, that is going to be dependent on terms of what we discover and the types of risk that creates for the city. So since we have just kicked off this work, I can't give you insight into exactly how that will or will not be addressed, but it's absolutely a topic we will be looking at.
I would really want it to be formally addressed. I'm not comfortable relegating this to a discretionary item. I think that the challenges to city leadership are significant enough that it needs to be a standard part of the report.
Excuse me, Annie Rose, are you going to interview all the city council members?
Yes, as part of this work, we speak with each one.
Right. And how does that interview process go? Like, do you have a standard set of questions, or how do you proceed on that?
Yeah, we do. We have a certain set of topics that we like to cover with everyone, as well as giving each council member space to bring up any particular issues that they are concerned about. So as part of that, the reporting will be part of the
considered part of that standard. If you do have a standard set of questions, can this issue that has been brought up by Vice Chair Verville be a specific element in that question set?
Yes, it's already part of our topic list, so it would be addressed through that process.
With the specificity that Vice Chair Verville has outlined?
Well, since we're already halfway through our interviews, I would have to double check. Colleen is conducting those interviews, so I could confirm that with her.
Okay.
Okay. I think that again, I don't want this to ride to another. I mean, the last risk analysis was done in what, 2017?
Correct.
So I really believe that this needs to be formally included. And if the interview process has been partially completed, I think it's worthwhile to going back to those who have been interviewed with just these questions. Both the project, the narrative reporting that they're getting from the city staff on projects, and the information that they're getting, in the budget process. I do know for a fact that there were 2 no votes to the last budget, and those 2 no votes were primarily the result of the fact that, you know, the council members threw up their hands and just said, I have no idea what's inside this budget. No idea. And so that to me is a huge red flag in the process. So this cannot be a discretionary item that may or may not appear in the final report. This, if need be, you know, I would like to direct Moss Adams to include to include an evaluation of the risk associated with narrative-based staff reports on both budgets and projects as they appear for approval by the council, and the information content and the level of executive summary in those reports that allows the council members to have full view of the entire situation before they basically and is a meaningfully allows them to get their heads around this information before they actually have to cast a vote.
So
I'm wondering, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You have more.
I was just going to say, I think that this might be a similar question to the one that was coming up even around the HSGP report, which is once we've already begun work or concluded work, that a scope has been set for that work. And the scope, as you all know, the scope is set in collaboration with this group. Once that scope has been set, if there are adjustments to that need to be made, I think that's a fully separate question. What I can say for sure is that reporting, analysis, and the decision-making process at the governing body level is part of our standard scope in terms of what we review in our analysis.
That's fine, but I need to have an analysis and a conclusion on the quality of the information that is included in these reports that's getting to the council members. That has to be opined on in this report, one way or the other.
Okay. I think that's the feedback we've gotten. I would say that given what we know, we have city council members on this committee. I would approach that a motion would be appropriate and we can vote on it, and that I can work with Gigi and put a call into Colleen to see what's been done is where I think we stand. But so that's my overview of what we could do going forward, Mark. So what do you think?
So I'm very happy to put a motion forward asking for specific elements to be included in the scope in this report, and that you would the scope would be modified to specifically address this, and that the outcome of this report would specifically address this, and that basically you can then work with Colleen, I guess.
Well, I'm just going to check in with Colleen. I'm not going to. I'm going to
All
check in. I'm going to do what I can.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think we need a motion that's more specific. So.
Okay, so my motion would be.
I'll second.
Hold on.
Well, let's have a motion out first.
The motion would be to evaluate the risk associated with current use of narrative-based staff reports and analysis for budget and project approvals by city council, which lack concise summary analyses, including original budgets, budget modifications, variances to final budgets, along with annual budget packages that exceed 1,000 pages in length but lack summary analyses. This roll forward analyses in the second year of a budget process should be reviewed, and actual to budget variance information, especially in the second year budget, included, and with key summarized operating information variances. But that's it. So I think those are that's the essence of the elements that need to be included in the
Okay,
scope.
so hold on, Mark, your motion is getting, I need a Cliff's Note version just to see your motion. So don't made your motion, correct? Or do you still have more?
No, that's it.
The motion should be somewhat short.
Then
so
how
are
about,
you good with your motion?
How about evaluate risk associated with the current use of narrative-based staff reports and analyses for budget and project approvals, which lack concise summary analyses, including original budgets, budget modifications, variances to final budgets, review annual budget packages, review the effectiveness of annual budget packages that exceed 1,000 pages in length but lack summary analyses, and also the need for roll forward analyses on multi-year budgets and projects.
All right, do I hear a second?
Sure, I'll second.
Second. I see member Davis has her hand up.
Yeah, I have trouble supporting this motion, and the reason is that the motion sort of presupposes the outcome. I would have no problem with a motion asking Moss Adams to evaluate, via its interviews with council members, whether or not there's any risk associated with the current form of staff reports. But the current motion doesn't do that. What it says is the current staff reports are bad and lead to bad decisions, and I want that put in the final report. And I don't think it's appropriate for this council to direct Moss Adams to come to those conclusions. So I won't be supporting it in its current form. I would support a motion that would direct Moss Adams to include in its risk assessment whether or not the current form of staff reports is adequate for making informed decisions. I think that's what they could do, but I don't think we should presuppose or judge what the outcome would be. So in the current form, I can't support the motion.
Well, I would support Commission Member Davis's motion if one of the issues is that the council members themselves are not, some of them don't have a financial background, and so their ability to know what should be included and what shouldn't be included is a challenge. And so I would want Moss Adams to more prospectively or prescriptively say these elements should be included in any project approval requirement or in any budget. And what is best practices, for decision-making processes? What is the minimum amount of information that you need? I think I understand Commission Member Davis's point, but I really do think I'm leery of asking a non-technical person to say, hey, what kind of variance analysis should I have? Or what kind of, it's like a non-technical person is just going to sit there and say, I just need the information so I know what's going on. And sometimes that's as good as they can actually verbalize what it is that they want. And so I think Moss Adams, being an accounting firm and a finance firm, should be very specific in what it's looking at and what's missing and what needs to be added to these kinds of staff communications to the council members. That's the reason I've been so specific.
So is there any alteration to the motion that you would like to make based on members Davis's comments?
What I'm at, my motion, unless it didn't sound that way, my motion is about asking him to look for specific items so that it's almost like I'm trying to provide in this motion like a checklist, so that so when they opine on whether or not something is fully adequate, there's at least a basic checklist that says these basic elements have been included or they have not been included. And I'm concerned that without having some kind of basic checklist, that an opinion can be an opinion can be delivered that is more subjective and probably doesn't address the point. It's just like in the HSGP report, the risk analyses that we saw there was a large degree of subjectivity in the assignment of the risk profile, even though in one instance that was low profile, it looks like it could be a very major risk. So what I want to do is I want to have an end product that is as productive and helpful as possible. And I think having some basic elements in a prescriptive manner that they have to look at, I think would get to that point.
Member Davis, comments?
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether or not the council has financial training. Moss Adams is an auditing firm. And so I think what we should do is, I have no problem with directing them to inquire via council members and by their own independent review of our processes to determine whether or not the information that's being given to council members is adequate to support good decision making. But I don't, again, I just go back to, we shouldn't determine what the outcome is. We should, I mean, that's why we've hired Moss Adams. We're not the auditors. And so saying they should investigate the risk assessment related to the current form of staff reports is one thing. Saying, but they have to create a checklist and they have to say this is what's on the checklist, when I don't know if that's right. With all due respect, Mark, you may have a checklist. They may have a different checklist. I don't know if there is some standard industry checklist. And so I think, we've hired Moss Adams to be our auditors. We can give them direction to assess the risk associated with the current form of staff reports and whether that provides information sufficient for council members to make informed decisions. And to the extent in that they determine that there is some risk, and they could say these are the ways staff reports, just as they have, for example, with the report we heard tonight on the Human Services Grant Program, they can give us a readout, as to this is what our recommendations are, and this is what staff reports should look like, or they could say current staff reports are adequate. I just don't want to presuppose the outcome of this. I understand you're dissatisfied, but that doesn't necessarily mean the staff reports are bad. I don't know the answer to that. And I'm willing to leave that to Moss Adams. I'm fine with asking them to investigate it, but I just don't want to presuppose the outcome or the recommendations they might come up with. So, I can just vote against the motion. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
Go ahead. Phil has his hand up.
No, I hear.
Member Brock,
I
please.
hear both sides of this. And yes, I would like them to investigate whether reports are sufficient, whether we're getting the information. I do suggest that if they come back and say, hey, some of the process should be improved, that we can, as a city council, vote to improve the reports that we want to improve. So yes, I can say that there are cases when I've got massive reports, and I'd love to have a Cliff Notes version. If we still use Cliff Notes, I'm not sure that's possible. But so I would love to see more specificity, more detail, easier to read, easier for the layman to read. But I'm not sure we can dictate that right this second. So I would like I agree with the mayor that we should add that investigation into the report. I think the city council could decide, hey, there are deficiencies, we need more information, which we could do now, and say we'd like more information. And I would be happy to get an outline later of what we need, but I'm not sure it needs to be as specific as you're asking in the motion, which is one reason I said usually motions are relatively short, and you give in this case, our auditors some room to investigate, come back to it. Either 7 council members will say, hey, everything's fine, there's no problem here, or they're going to say, you know what, Mark has some points, Moss Adam has some points, let's see what we can do to make our processes better. Does that sort of glean? Is that sort of what you were saying?
Yeah, all I'm saying is I'm happy directing Moss Adams to evaluate the risk associated with the current formulation of staff reports and whether that formulation provides sufficient information for council members. And you could even say council members who, typically do not have financial training to make informed decisions of the matters before them. I mean, I think that's what we're asking Moss Adams to do. It's a risk assessment report. What are the risks associated, if any, with the current form of staff reports? And they will come back and say, here are some risks, here's what you could do to fix them. Or they might say, you know what, we talked to people, we looked at the staff reports and they look fine. I just don't want to presuppose the outcome, because I'm certainly not qualified to presuppose the outcome. That's why we've hired Moss Adams.
Just, I don't know if you understand my background, Gleam, but
I
I've
know
been
your background very well. I know your background very well, Mark. You don't need to give me your resume. I know.
All right, very good. Maybe what we can do here is direct Moss Adams to look at the narrative-based staff reports and budgeting communications, and also include in their final product best practices. Moss Adams talks about best practices. Everything I've discussed is very standard across industries, up and down both private and public entities. So I have no problem. It's all standard stuff. So I think Moss Adams should include a comparison of how the city is doing things to best practices. I think that would be instructive.
Vice Chair Verville, I'd just like to remind you, this is an enterprise risk assessment. It would identify probably at a high level that if that was a risk, that it would need to be looked at, and that would be one of the projects that would be proposed. It would be my assessment of how that would be seen.
You want to, Mark? You want to remake the motion?
Let me try to.
I'll withdraw my second for the moment, and
Okay.
ask if you can simplify and make it easier so that the mayor will also concur that it's a good thing.
So how about we say evaluate the risk associated with the current use of narrative-based staff reports and analyses for budget and project approvals by City Council within the context of industry best practices.
I guess I would just say instead of industry, since we're not in industry, municipal best practices.
It's so standard, that would be fine.
This is perhaps a small point of clarification, but as part of the enterprise risk assessments, these types of reports are slightly different from a lot of the reports that you'll see from Moss Adams. These are enterprise-wide assessments of individual areas of risk. And so within the actual body of the report, what you will see is a list of current conditions, basically saying here are the things that are contributing to risk in this category area, and then some mitigation strategies, as opposed to some of our other more in-depth assessments where you're seeing both current conditions and full assessment and recommendation against best practices. So as Member Vandenberg mentioned, in this case, what you would see in the final report is, let's say, if the reporting is a challenge, we would describe the challenges and the risks that's creating for the city, and then have a mitigation recommendation around making updates to that. It would be very short, but it would certainly be in alignment with best practices. I just want to make sure that expectations are clear around the level of recommendations and what that looks like. And if you're curious, the 2017 report does give a great example of sort of the format in which this information will be coming to you as well.
Okay, I'm still working on the motion. So the motion, I still think that evaluation of the risk, if any, associated with the current use of narrative-based staff reports and analyses for budget and project approvals by City Council should be reviewed in light of municipal best practices. How's that?
Do you have a second?
Municipal finance best practices.
Maria, did you get that?
I did, because I discovered Teams has transcriptions.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds good.
I mean, if you'd like me to repeat it,
Sure.
it is to
We would.
motion to direct Moss Adams to evaluate the risk, if any, associated with the current use of narrative-based staff reports and analysis for budget and project approvals by council. And that it should be reviewed in light of municipal finance best practices.
Perfect.
Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second it. Yes, I'll second it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was starving, so I'm having dinner now because I had.
All right. Is there any other?
Luckily, someone else came home.
Good. Is there any discussion around it? All right. I don't see no raised hands. Let's move, go ahead and have a roll call on that motion.
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verval,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. All right. Well done, team. Any other comments about the internal audit status report, or can we have a motion to receive and file?
I move.
I'll second.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call on accepting the internal audit status report, please?
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verval,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes, and I would say that's the best robust discussion I've heard on a status report in a long time. So congratulations, Moss Adams, for creating that. All right, let's move on to the progress report on findings and observations. Gigi's going to present that, and she's going to start off with that. I did want to say thank you very much to Moss Adams and your team for coming out tonight.
Okay, I'll make this very quick. It's late. Let's move to the second slide. So this time around, we have completed 12 recommendations, or we've made progress on 12 recommendations. Do want to note that when we have an ongoing recommendation, as was mentioned during the HR staff report, that is included in our implemented recommendations. We are including those ongoing HR items in that 76 implemented recommendations. And I'm thrilled to say that we are at more than 3/4 of the way through our current reports. If we could move to the next slide, just a couple things that I wanted to bring up. I'm thrilled to say that we have another report that is done. Our parking permit and citation processing contract, we have been waiting to get, again, it's a COVID related thing. We needed to get over to the offices of our vendors so that we can do physical inventories. That group will now be doing physical inventories on a regular basis. So with that, you won't see that report on there anymore. The other 2017, the oldest report that we have, is the HR benefits billing. This is waiting for labor negotiations on our health benefits. It's this umbrella agreement that we have with many unions, and that is coming up next year. So that's why that is waiting for the next set. If you want, Laura, could you keep going through the report very quickly? Keep going beyond there. I did want to mention that, keep one back. The print shop, I've been talking to the clerk's office, and we're hoping to come to you later on at a future meeting, potentially in May or August, to talk about what's left in this area. The print shop has gone through a shift during the pandemic. So we would like to, for these reports where it seems like we have some recommendations that potentially may not make as much sense right now, we do want to come back, talk about it, and maybe see if we can close that report.
Right.
Laura, if you could move on to the next slide. And you heard about the HR organizational assessment this time. While EDD's been making some additional progress, there's nothing huge to report. But if we could move on to the permitting study on the next page. I did want to mention that the monthly customer surveys that were one of the recommendations are being completed. They're being shared with everyone that's involved in the process and being tracked for performance. the permitting system procurement is getting off the ground. This has been a process where we thought we were going to go with a contractor. We realized that it would be best to actually go out and take a look at the market. We were going to be a beta test for one contractor, but we felt like it made a lot more sense for us to be looking across the market to get the best value, to see what's out there. So what we're doing right now is we're working on the RFP, and that should be going out soon. And the cross-functional committee that was developed across many of the different areas that touch these permits is reducing quite a few conflicts. And now they're actually working on documenting the agreements and the processes that they have been working through. So progress is being made on that report. And with that, I think those are the ones that I wanted to highlight today in the interest of time. That completes my report. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers, Maria, for the progress report on findings and observations?
If anyone would like to speak on this item, please press the raise hand button or *5 if you're on the phone. It looks like we do not have any public speakers.
Thank you. Any discussions or questions of staff from committee members? Seeing none, I request a motion and second to receive and file.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Thank you. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Committee Member Brock,
Yes.
Committee Member Davis,
Yes.
Committee Member Para,
Yes.
Vice Chair Verval,
Yes.
and Chair Vandenberg.
Yes. With that, I'd like to thank Maria, who is new to our, from the clerk's office, who helped, I think, for the first time. So thank you very much. Great job. If I'd written down your last name, I'd say it. Dakana Wisner? Maria?
Dakana Wisner.
Dakana Wisner. There you go.
Yes.
Well, thank you for joining us. You did a great job. And I'd like to remind everybody that our next meeting will be in person and that we anticipate having that in March. That will be with the financial auditors to look at the CAFR and discuss that. And with that, the meeting will be held in the meeting room in the parking garage across from the City Hall. So with that, I would like to thank everybody for their time and effort on this important committee, and we are adjourned at 9:38 p.m. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.